So just like that series you find in nature, like based on sunflower. See the net everywhere.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. That was weird. I tried to make a new intro, and because I was getting sick of the whole that movie Pie intro. So and then I made that intro today, and I just uploaded it. And if you noticed, it was like only like a section of the screen was showing. You could like see me in the background, so I had to like hide myself. Remember, thank you. Pink Beam.
Pink Beam 2374 has become initiated. Hi Neil and friends, blessed evening to you.
Thank you for being a member for 4 months. Appreciate you. Anyways, today we have Jacob Berman in the house. So you just wrote a paper. Is it published yet?
It's getting there. It's a long paper, about 114 pages long. It was actually going to be longer, but I cut it down a bit.
Might as well make it at that point.
I'm sorry?
Might as well make it a book at that point.
Yeah, it'll become part of one eventually.
What is
after
it?
A few more
arguing that Paul did not write the letters, the 7 authentic letters? Or he didn't write any of the letters?
He didn't write any of them.
Dang.
I don't think he wrote any of them.
Paul did not think about that. Think of how damaging that would be if that was true. That Paul did not write these letters. That's the end of Christianity. There's nothing left at that point. It's the only thing you got before 70 AD. And that would change how we even if we found out that every single Christian text that ever references Christianity was after the fall of the temple, that actually might, number one, that would change everything, because you have to reassess. Wait a minute, is this a new Judaism that comes out of the temple being gone? Is this a new replacement? Is that what's going on here? Because during Second Temple period, you can read Josephus and different texts to talk about how Jews living in Roman cities across the empire, they didn't send in they paid their taxes first of all, but they also would send their tithes to Jerusalem. So there was 10%. There was a huge influx of money from the Roman Empire going to Jerusalem. Now, the reason why this would be so significant is because all of a sudden it kind of makes sense where the temple's gone. You have all these people in these different major urban areas, whether they're in Corinth or Ephesus or Athens, Rome, whatever, Alexandria, you name it, Antioch, Syria, Cappadocia, all these places, right? And they're like, what do we do? We don't have anything. And now all of a sudden there's this new thing called Christianity. In fact, that temple, the reason why it failed is because they didn't know the Messiah was already here. It explains this whole thing. It becomes a cope mechanism of why Judaism failed. And then we can get into why it became more Gentile oriented later on. But I think we all agree early on, this was a Jewish movement. And so number two, the other thing is, it's also true that all of the texts that mention Christianity or anything related to Christianity are also after 70. That even begs the question if Jesus even existed. Think about that, because now we're talking about people decades later writing about stuff. Decades, like we're another generation of people later, and the first texts we get are people who had nothing to do with his movement at all. And I know that's a harder question to get to, but but that would make it more likely, in my opinion, rather than Paul being a real person who really wrote these letters, and he wrote them in the 40s and 50s and 60s. That makes the likelihood of what he's talking about being more historical.
For me, the letters being after 70 doesn't really impact the historical Jesus as much. What it does impact is when one believes that the entire system of Christianity as we understand it was formed. I remember many years ago when I read through Josephus, I thought to myself, interesting. He mentions Jesus, he mentions that James, that was allegedly his brother, and he mentions John the Baptist, but he never mentions Paul. That's curious. And some others will notice that Justin Martyr doesn't talk about Paul at all, but he knew Marcion's text, and I'm kind of skipping a bit there. I'm going to talk about Marcion a bit later in the stream, because I also addressed this in my paper, because I felt like, well, I need to address Marcion because Marcion had a collection of Pauline letters that are shorter than the canonical counterparts. But back to the point that I was making. So Josephus talks about Jesus, James, that was apparently Jesus' brother, and John the Baptist, but he never mentions Paul. So I asked myself, what is the earliest evidence that we have, extra biblical evidence, or anything? So what is the earliest extra biblical evidence that we have for any mention of a Paul or him writing letters at all? And the answer to both of those questions simultaneously is Clement of Rome. Clement of Rome wrote one letter. It's a long letter. 90s, right? Yeah, yeah. I put it in 93. I would say 93 because of the urgency at the start of the letter. That he seems to be suggesting that very recently another persecution has befallen them. Kind of Hebrews kind of says something similar to that effect as well. And there's a lot of overlaps between Hebrews and Clement that we can get into later. But Clement talks about a persecution that's befallen them, and it's obviously the Domitianic persecution, the second major Domitianic persecution against philosophers. Now, what I will often get is Domitian didn't persecute Christians. Well, it's true that he didn't target them directly. They weren't the primary target. He was targeting philosophers in general. But Christians were definitely caught in the middle, and I'll get to why I think that later. And there's a lot of tradition about that as well. That's hard to get around. So back to First Clement. So First Clement mentions a letter by Paul, epistolon, a letter. This is different from the word epistoles, letters, plural. We see that in 2 Peter. And the reason 2 Peter uses that word is that 2 Peter wants you to understand, I know all of them. I know the Pauline collection. Whereas Clement's saying, I knew a letter. Now, that doesn't preclude that Clement didn't know other letters, but it's not a good start. Because all you can confirm is that Clement knew at least one letter. You cannot confirm he knew more than one letter. And he says very little about Paul. He mentions Paul like a handful of times, and he says that that Paul was 7 times in bonds. Now let's think about that for a second. 7 times in bonds. Even if you believe, let's say somebody's a hyper skeptic. Not hyper skeptical. The opposite. A hyper conservative Christian that accepted all of the letters of Paul as genuine, all of Acts as even real history. Let's say somebody believes all that. Mm-hmm. Even if you add all the imprisonments in the prison letters and Acts together, you don't get to 7 times. what is Clement talking about with Paul being 7 times in bonds? He never says it. By the way, he never claims it was Romans that put Paul in these bonds, that bounded Paul. We don't know what he means by he was bounded. I have a suspicion, but can't prove it. But anyway, when does Clement place the lifetime of Paul? I think that's another question that needs to be answered. And in my paper, I argue that Clement places Paul's era in the 30s, and there's a couple of indications of that. For one thing, when you look at Clement and you compare it to Josephus, there's some overlaps between there's a couple of overlaps between the movement of Paul and Herod Antipas. What I mean by movement is where they're traveling to, where they're going. Clement mentions that toward the end of Paul's life, Paul went to furthest west of the empire. That's Hispania. Now, Herod Antipas was also expelled and went to Hispania himself. Now, why am I making a connection there? Because there's a connection with the pseudo-Clementine literature and what Josephus talks about happened in the 30s. After the massacre of the Samaritans at Mount Gerizim in 36, we're seeing all kinds of political shifts. Caiaphas is removed as high priest. Pilate's removed as the prefect. Herod Antipas is slightly later removed as tetrarch. So there's a lot of shifts here in the geopolitics in that region. A lot's changing. People are being replaced left and right. There's one major reason they all have in common for why they are being removed from power. It's because of the way they handled the situations, the constant massacres, the constant executions that pissed people off, that pissed off the Judeans. And the Romans are like, you know what? We need to peel the onion back. We need to rethink things because this is not working. Pilate's messing things up. Caiaphas is messing things up. Herod Antipas is messing things up. We need to replace them. Now, where does Paul come into play here? The frequently neglected pseudo-Clementine recognitions talks about Saul, as it also calls him the enemy. It talks about his attack upon James, the brother of Jesus. Now, I thought about this. So there are scholars like Jeffrey Butts, Robert Eisenman, and others that will look at this and to see, okay, there's some kind of history here, but here's the complication. The complication is that the pseudo-Clementine recognitions is largely historical fiction. And so you have an element that appears to be history, which is in book 1. So you have to ask yourself, how do I methodologically separate that element from the rest of the fictional material that's in the recognitions? Can I do that? Is there a basis for that? And I say, yes, actually, much of the historical elements of the recognitions is pretty much just in book 1. Everything after book 1, you can clearly tell is fiction. But here's the other thing. In book 1, it gives you another view of the Samaritan massacre. A lot of people don't, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anybody notice this. In book 1 of the recognitions, it talks about John and James, the son of Zebedee, trying to interfere. Looks like you got a super chat coming in, so I'll just hold on for a second.
Okay.
At Reginald has dropped $10 super chat. If recent scholarship is discovering that it's a patchwork of others' myths, repurposed for the Jews, what's left to learn from the Bible over source mythologies which developed much more naturally?
It's not all it is, though. There is a lot of that going on, but that's like you have that with like Virgil's Aeneid is rewriting Homer's Odyssey, right? For the Latin people. So it's like that's part of it, definitely. And everyone, we always talk about that on my channel, but there is real history in the Bible. Like the Kings and Chronicles is not an accurate history book that you're going to get. Like, it's not like you're going to read it and like, that's exactly what happened. There's a lot of propaganda in there. There's a lot of like shit in there. Like it's very focused on which kings followed Moses' law, which ones didn't. So it's like, all right, this is it's bullshit. However, those kings are real kings. Hezekiah is a real king. Omri's a real king. These are kings that are mentioned in the historical record. So it's not all just mythological tropes being redone. But anyways, yeah, especially in the New Testament as well. Yeah, there's a lot of tropes that are being applied to Jesus, but first century Judea does have messianic movements. It does have Pontius Pilate there. You can draw. There is little kernels of history in there. So, thank you for that super chat.
Agreed. So, so I was at the Pseudo Clementine. So, if you read toward the end of book 1, so like chapters 71, 72, the final 2 chapters of book 1 of the Recognitions, Clement, the person called Clement that wrote the Recognitions is a different Clement. If you look at the Shepherd of Hermas, actually, and you look at Origen's Philokalia, that becomes pretty clear. There's actually another Clement. He was never a bishop of Rome. He lived around 150 of the Common Era. And he's writing letters to multiple provinces, which is not what Clement of Rome back in the 90s did. This is a different guy altogether. It's just another Clement. So the so-called pseudo-Clementine literature was by another dude named Clement, who wasn't the same person as the Clement back in the 90s. This is a different guy. And that's why in the Recognitions and Homilies, he doesn't actually claim to be bishop. His claim that he was a bishop actually comes to play a little later in the pseudo-Clementine literature. But anyway, how do we separate that material regarding the attack upon James in the Recognitions? Well, let me go back to John and James, son of Zebedee. I didn't finish my point there. John and James, son of Zebedee, go up to Mount Gerizim in book 1 of the Recognitions. And what do? They try to interfere with the Samaritans and what they're doing there. And the text implies they were killed. They became silent. Papias of Hierapolis, he's quoted by another church father. I can't remember the name, but it's in my paper. That he says the Jews killed John and James, son of Zebedee, together. They were both killed together. That actually contradicts Acts. Because in Acts, James is killed by Herod Antipas. I'm sorry, not Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa. Got the wrong Herod. But John supposedly lives on for decades. And I think the reason that Luke set that up in Acts is because I think his goal was to conflate John the apostle with John the elder. But that's a mess for another time. But anyway, so Luke had agendas there to make that. Yeah, I'll keep James dead at that time, but I'm going to make him die slightly later and at the hands of Herod Agrippa for some reason. And I'm going to have John live way longer than he actually did. But if you look at book 1, what really happened is that they were killed together in 36 during the Samaritan massacre. They just got killed just immediately before Pilate's men arrived and slaughtered the Samaritans. The Recognitions places the attack upon James at the hands of Saul and his group immediately after that, shortly after that, in the same year. Just to get everybody on the same chronology here. Okay. It's in the same year.
It has to do with Paul's letters not being written by
Paul. I'm about to get there.
Okay.
If we accept that the attack upon James, his attempted assassination at the hands of Saul actually happened, then Galatians makes absolutely no sense. In Galatians, what you have Paul arguing theologically with Cephas and James. Now, the minute James show up and Cephas flees the scene, it's like, I'm just getting out of here. I'm not going to be part of this any further. I'm like, wait a minute. That's not how the personality of Paul is portrayed in book 1 of the Recognitions. This is very different. Now, where does that information in book 1 of the Recognitions come from? Where did that come from? Well, we're told that it came from letters of Zacchaeus. They don't survive, but the text tells you that that's the source of the information for book 1, for the material involving, especially for the material involving James, at least for the material involving James, the brother of Jesus, when Saul and his men tried to kill him. So either Saul was an assassin for the high priest, because that's what the text is saying. He was working for Caiaphas. He was taking orders from Caiaphas. This takes me back to what I was saying earlier, Neil. Why was Caiaphas removed from power? Josephus doesn't tell you. Well, if we listen to book 1 of the Recognitions, I think we got an answer. Because Caiaphas ordered the death of James, the brother of Jesus. And so you have the Samaritan massacre at the hands of Pilate. You have John and James, son of Zebedee, being killed. You have Caiaphas ordering the death of James. James eventually is killed by an unnamed man with a fuller's club. Abdias of Babylon tells us that. And Abdias of Babylon's text is being described by so-called pseudo-Dorotheus attire. That's the source of that. So you have James being killed in 36, which also creates a problem for, okay, well, if he was killed in 36, then he can't be the James that Josephus was talking about, but I'll get to that later. So,
but this is all written in the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, which isn't that later literature?
Yeah, I would say it's mid-2nd century, but he's telling you in book 1, he's pulling from letter correspondence we don't have by Zacchaeus. And that's what I talk about in my paper. And there are scholars that actually talk about that the pseudo-Clementine recognitions is using material from the preaching of Peter. But that's more hypothetical. The text actually says it comes from the letters of Zacchaeus.
So why would that affect Paul's epistles being real or not?
Well, like I said, it contradicts Galatians, because in Galatians, that's not what's going on there. You have an argument. Nobody's trying to kill each other. Nobody's trying to use Fuller clubs on each other. None of that's happening in Galatians. In Galatians, it's a heated argument regarding circumcision and other things. It's not.
Which passage are you talking about?
Which text? Recognitions or Galatians?
Galatians.
It's in Galatians. Let me find it.
Take a look at it so people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Galatians 2:7.
Galatians 2:7. Let me just pull this up in a second.
Yeah.
Boom. Where's my favorite edition? There we go. So, seeing that I've been entrusted with the gospel, to the uncircumcised, talking about the Gentiles, just as Peter had been to the circumcised, talking about the Jews.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's my point, Neil. Here's another way I can make an argument for my position that there actually is reliability here in book 1 and the recognition. So let me connect First Clement with the recognitions to what Josephus is talking about, and it makes sense with the political context of the late 30s. So we're told by Clement that Paul went furthest west of the empire, which is exactly what the former tetrarch Herod Antipas did. He went to Hispania as well.
Wait, hold on. What does this have to do with a big? Is that a fight or something was going on in here?
What I said is, okay, let me take a step back. What I was saying is, what Galatians is telling us does not match the story in book 1, the recognitions. In recognitions, you have an attack upon James at the hands of Saul. In Galatians, there is no physical attack going on. You have an argument about circumcision that's going on. It's a heated oral argument. There is no physical assault going on. That's my point.
Yeah, but can't both of those be true at the same time, where he can be talking about a debate between circumcision, and then also on top of that could be an assault that's happening that's not being written about by Paul?
I suppose, but the complication is that Clement of Rome actually never mentioned a circumcision debate going on between Paul and Peter or Cephas. He doesn't talk about that, and also the other thing is, I don't think that I'm not convinced that the historical Paul engaged in this kind of argument, because to me it looks like it's reflective of a post-70 scenario when, after the war is over and the argument against circumcision is going around. And Nino Livesey talks about this from a different angle.
Right.
That if you go to Josephus and you read what he says about what happens to what happens to adults that are not circumcised, they will forcefully circumcise them, literally. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine a pre-war Paul going up to Jerusalem before 70, which I find that very hard to believe, arguing against circumcision. I'm like, I'm surprised he didn't get killed just for even trying. Like that's just gonna really piss them off. And that's not going on here. So this argument in Galatians, to me, that's one of the main reasons why this does not making sense being before 70. So let me go back for a moment, because we're kind of jumping ahead here. Let me go back to what I'm almost done talking about what I think about the 30s Paul, because to me, there's not much to know about him. I'm almost done. So because I don't want people to lose track. I don't want to be all over the place. So, just to conclude on my brief reconstruction of historical Paul, is I think what happened is when you combine First Clement with the material in Book 1, the recognitions with Abdias of Babylon, it's a very coherent picture. What this guy was, he was an assassin for the high priest Caiaphas, and the reason he went furthest west of the empire was because Caiaphas was removed from power. So the man that was in charge of him is gone. Pilate's removed from power. Herod Antipas is removed from power. And so what's happening is Paul is removing himself as far away from the Jesus movement, from the Nazarenes as possible. He's going to go all the way to Hispania, which is the furthest way you can get from Judea within the Roman Empire. He just wants to be far away from the scene, and that's what I think he was doing. Clement goes on to mention that jealous, envious men killed Paul, as a matter of fact. And because of that passage, there's actually two Christian scholars, Oscar Coleman and David Eastman. I cite both of them in my paper. They argue that other Christians killed Paul. Now, I don't think they're Christians as we understand them. I think they were the original Jesus movement that were. I think they hunted down Paul because of what he's done back in Judea.
Ebionite types, kind of.
Yeah, and I would prefer to say Nazarene, because I look at Ebionite as kind of like a breakaway movement of the Nazarenes.
I would
anyway,
I would agree that the original Christians, the original Jesus movement, was not what we find in the New Testament at all. That's now I'm going to come back to Galatians because there's more to what I'm saying there. I can make a stronger argument for what I'm saying there, but I'm going to come back to that. So, based on Herod Antipas being in Hispania and his death occurring around 39, and by the way, I admit this is massive speculation. I definitely can't prove this, but this is a guess. Mm-hmm.
I suspect that Paul was probably killed in 39. That's just a guess. But I think he got knocked out of the game very early on, and that's it. So that's my point, Neil. So if you look at Book 1, the recognitions, and you combine that information with First Clement and Abdias of Babylon, it actually fits the political context of the late 30s in Josephus. That's my point. They don't really contradict Josephus's picture. They complement it. They supplement it. They don't contradict the picture. Whereas in the epistles, there's a different situation going on there. And so now we're moving on to when I think the letters were written, who I think wrote them. So let's start with Galatians. We were talking about Galatians anyway. So let's start with that. In Galatians, you have an argument against circumcision that's going on. And the person calling himself Paul is arguing with Cephas. I'm like, hey, buddy, let's tolerate uncircumcised people. I don't like that you're removing yourself and you can't even stand next to a person or eat next to a person who's not circumcised, excuse me. They're like, wow, that's kind of a bold thing for I'm going to call him canonical Paul, for canonical Paul to be saying before the war, which is absolutely not the picture that both the genuine Clementine, the earlier Clementine material, and the later Clementine material say. We're getting a totally different kind of Paul here, a Paul that is argumentative, a Paul that's a theologian who's engaging in arguments and trying to change people's minds.
Right here, prior to coming into some men of James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. When they came, he began to withdraw and separate himself, fearing those from the circumcision.
Exactly. So just because he removes himself from.
Why I'm laughing is because I engage with these people on Twitter, these Christian identity people who think like the real Jews are whites, and it's just funny how in the New Testament there's this. Paul is literally talking about Peter, like one of the major apostles, like Jesus's right hand man, the first bishop of Rome and Syria, Damascus, right? And he's literally, he hates the Gentiles so much he won't even eat with them. He has to withdraw. And these people are like, yeah, this is about it. We're the real Jews. Like, come on, dude. Read your Bible. Read your Bible. The movement was not what you think it was. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I know that's probably some people watching this who are not, super online are probably like, what? What do you mean? Who are those people? Dude, trust me, they exist. There's lots of them. And it's funny. It's just funny.
And so here's the other thing. In my paper, I assemble what I look at as slips in church father literature. I look at stuff that massively contradicts the standard chronology that slips through the church fathers. Take Jerome, for instance, in Unfamous Men. Jerome mentions a man called Saul of Giscala. If this cannot be the Paul that Clement was referring to, because Saul of Giscala left Gush. That's Hebrew for Giscala. He left Gush when the Romans seized it. That's what Jerome says. His source for that's Epaphras. That's Epaphroditus. And he left it when the Romans had seized it. That's 67 CE.
Yeah.
That's not earlier than that. That's 67. And by the way, what confirms he cannot be the Paul that Clement's talking about is that this man was a young man. Jerome makes that point very strongly. He is a young man. Let's think about that for a second. He's a young man during the Jewish-Roman War, and he's removing himself with his family to Tarsus. And then after that, he was taught by Gamaliel. But that's not the picture that the book of Acts is talking about. In Acts, Gamaliel the first taught Paul. But if there was a Gamaliel that taught this other Paul that Jerome's talking about, it must be Gamaliel the second. He was appointed the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the leader, president of the Sanhedrin around 80, circa 80. So I'm like, wait a minute now.
Do you think
this can't?
Gamaliel? You think it's the second Gamaliel?
Yes. Well, there is another Gamaliel. We know that. What we can debate is if he taught Saul at all.
You're saying that they switched his, like he was a student. And
yes, they switched the Gamaliel around in Acts. That's my argument.
Dude, if this is true, because this is Gamaliel 2 is the beginning of rabbinic Judaism.
I'm aware of that.
He's like the first rabbinic Jew. He was
involved with
right here, Yavni.
Yohanan ben Zakkai.
Yeah, this is the city after the Jewish war, after 70, where the Jews got together, the remnant that was left, the ones that didn't get slaughtered by the Romans. They went to Yavne and they created a new Judaism. I guess created is a weird word. They continued to practice the religion outside of the temple, and they sort of it becomes the new.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
But they were a bit.
The reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you're correct, and I don't know, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. If you're correct, that means Christianity is also a product of the same origin story as rabbinic Judaism. They're not even, it's not even like they're siblings, they're twins in the womb together. They're born at the same time.
And the common thread that ties them together in a way, and I'm going to come to that later, is the Flavians, but in different ways. Because what ties the Flavians to Christianity, in my opinion, is the Domitianic persecution in the 90s. So Christianity was very hostile to Domitian, and that's going to take me to 2 Thessalonians. But let me come back.
Also, one more point on that. School of Hillel, which is like the origin of this sort of philosophical outlet. It's interesting that they all claim descent from this school of Hillel, and Hillel's known for these three maxims, which are right here on the first thing it shows you on his Wikipedia page, and it's basically the golden rule right here: that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation. Go. So you can see how a gospel author from this school, or maybe adjacent to this school, or maybe some sort of offshoot of this school, would include that to be one of the sayings of Jesus.
Yeah. And I'm showing a slide here. If you can show this real quick, I want to show everybody the passage regarding Saul of Giscala from Jerome, just so everybody can see that this is real and I'm not making this up. Paul, formerly called Saul, an apostle outside the number of the 12 apostles, was of the tribe of Benjamin in the town of Giscala in Judea. When this was taken by the Romans, he removed with his parents to Tarsus in Cilicia, sent by them to Jerusalem to study law. He was educated by Gamaliel, a most learned man. whom Luke mentions. So it's as I said, this is after the Romans took back Guascala. And then Jerome is placing this chronologically. He's placing Saul going to Tarsus afterwards, and then his tutelage by Gamaliel after that. So that cannot be Gamaliel the first. This has to be Gamaliel the second, because it's the only way that makes any sense. And
I'm sorry. Wait. I was reading something. I was looking something up. Can you just repeat why it has to be the second one? I'm sorry.
Because Gamaliel the first died before the war. He died in 52.
And Jerome's talking about Paul being a student of the one that was alive during the war.
After, at least he says after he had arrived in Tarsus, after Guascala was seized by the Romans. So he doesn't. It's at some point after that.
I'm sorry. What part are you looking at on this? Put your mouse on it so I can see it.
The first bullet point, right here. He was educated by Gamaliel, a most learned man, whom Luke mentions. Okay, so that's still the first. Wouldn't that still be the first one though? No, the second one, because he's placing it after Guascala was seized. This was many years after Gamaliel the first death.
Let me read this out loud so our people listening can hear. Jerome on Famous Men 5:5. Paul, formerly called Saul, an apostle outside the number of the 12 apostles, was of the tribe of Benjamin and the town of Guascala in Judea. When this was taken by the Romans, he removed with his parents to Tarsus in Cilicia, sent them to Jerusalem to study law. He was educated by Gamaliel, but that still could be before 70. That doesn't have to be after 70.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. Even
the Romans are constantly going to the east and
Yeah, but every time I hear the argument that this could be before, I'm not really given an answer about, okay, when did the Romans take Guascala again in the first century? If we go to the next bullet point, Jerome talks about this again, and he connects the story to Epaphras. He says, we have received the following story about this Epaphras, Paul's fellow prisoner. They say that the apostle Paul's parents were from the region of Guascala and Judea, and that now notice he says here, and that when the whole province was laid waste by the hands of the Romans, and the Jews were dispersed into the world. See, that's everything I didn't mention.
There you go.
Jerome's much more specific.
That gives you now that's strong. Now you have something. Now there's meat on the bones. Okay. That's very convincing.
They were moved to the city of Tarsus in Cilicia as a young man. He followed the condition of his parents, and thus what he testifies about himself can be confirmed. And so, when you put that together, this is after the war.
Yeah.
This does not work, and he's saying to you that he's getting the story ties to the Epaphras, and I think he's the origin of the story. So here's how I interpret this. I think Epaphras wrote a document about Saul of Guascala in the 90s. It's lost. That document is Jerome's source, and the canonical Acts rehabilitates this document. To what degree it changes it, I cannot know. I don't like reconstructing text because I don't want to add hypothetical stuff in it that can't be corroborated. All I can know about that document is what Jerome says here, and I leave it at that.
Well, I did a word search for Guascala and the Jewish War, just to see what Josephus says.
Sure.
And we have here, he says, the Galileans, after the fall of Jotapata, still remained in revolt from Rome. So this is after 70. On the reduction of Tarichaea, surrendered the Roman. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is after 64. The revolt starts in, 66. The revolt starts in 66. So so no matter what, this is after 66. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but that doesn't matter for your argument. Either way, it can still work. It could be 67. It could be 67, and your argument still work. It'd still be the second Gamaliel. Anyways, Romans received the submission of all the fortresses and towns except Guascala, and the force which had occupied Mount Tabor. Gamala was also in league with these rebels, a city situated on the other side of the lake, opposite Tarichaea. Gamala formed part of the territory allotted to Agrippa, like Sogane and Seleucia. Gamala and Sogane were both in Galantis, the latter belonging to what is known as Upper, the former to Lower Gaul. Seleucia was near the lake Semicontinus. The lake is 30 furlongs in breadth and 60 in length. Let me just see if it says it mentions it one more time. Let me just do this. Gascala. Search within work. Okay, so we have quite a few mentions in the Jewish war. They fortified Gascala. So that might be it. Let's check this one out right here. John, son of Levi, fortified Gascala at his own expense. So that means that at some point after the Jews fortified Gascala, the Romans took it back.
Yeah.
When he says the Romans took Gascala, it's either in 63 BC when Pompey conquered it. Paul's not alive then.
Right, that can't work.
Or this time.
Exactly. It's a checkmate. You can't.
You have a great argument here, but the only thing is, if I'm a critic of this, I'm going to say, why do we care what Jerome writes? He's writing in 325 AD.
Oh, and I was to say, in other fields, scholars rely on later people to quote other documents we don't have all the time. That's just the way it works.
Yeah,
so,
but people are going to say that. That's all I'm saying. People are going to say, Jerome just didn't know.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll say this.
I'm not a fan of that type of.
No, in fact,
it's like completely, like it still should be like one of the prime examples I give is that John, what's his name? Not John. There's a Byzantine writer who talks about how the
John Chrysostom by chance?
Oh no, it's someone else. I can't think of his name right now, but there's a Byzantine writer right around 400 who writes about how the Hilaria was instituted by Claudius.
John of Ephesus?
No, doesn't matter. And so he says this, and a lot of people go, well, that's a late source. But then we find archaeology, inscriptions that support what this guy's saying. So sometimes late sources can be correct. Just because it's 400 years later, I mean, that's a good reason to be skeptical. I'm not saying you shouldn't be skeptical.
Yeah.
The source that's 300, 400 years later, but that doesn't mean it's wrong off the bat. Like, it can be correct.
Much of what we know about Alexander the Great comes from later sources.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, the source material in Arian, for example, he cites his sources that are going back to like
just like my sources do.
And that's what I like to see. I want to see, where does Jerome say where he gets his information from?
I just showed you. It was he connects it to Epaphroditus. The wording is kind of odd, but he says, I received this story.
Pull that back up again.
All right, give me a second.
Because that does make it a lot stronger if he's telling you where he found it. You know what I mean?
I got it. Second bullet point. He says, we have received the following story about this Epaphras.
About this Epaphras. Paul's fellow. Okay.
Exactly. See, that's my point. He connects receiving the information to that guy. And so that's my argument. It's a story that goes back to him. And this is the guy that is talked about.
He's talking about this guy right here. Epaphras. Mentioned an observer of the Apostle Paul, mentioned twice in the New Testament.
Yeah, and Philemon and Colossians. And I think he's a nickname. And even if somebody disagrees with me on this, it doesn't ruin my point. I think he's the same as Epaphroditus, but even if I'm wrong about that, it doesn't change what I'm saying here.
Might be. There's a lot of Epaphroditus though. There's like 20 of them, so I don't know what you would do with that, but yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to be talking about that later, and I know that later you'll mention again that Epaphroditus was a common name, but there's the way
there's like seven Epaphroditus in the first century.
Sure. But it's the way that he's being talked about in Philippians that I find interesting, but we'll come back to that later.
Sola is called Epaphroditus. That's one of his names.
So if we look at if we look at the letters and they talk about, and somebody might say to me, well, okay, so Paul's not a Sola of Giscala. He's the one that I think is behind. I think he's the one that's behind the letters in the 90s. And I think what's happening is he's the one that's experiencing, caught up in the midst of the Domitianic persecution. And I think this involves the author of First Clement. Now, here's something that I do want to mention. I want to redirect you to Eusebius, because this I understand is another radical position that some will oppose. But let me see if I can find the passage. So it's in Church History 318.5 by Eusebius. And this is where things get a little bit strange.
Do you have it?
Yeah, let me put it in on a slide so I can show everybody.
Yeah, I mean, while you're pulling that up, I do think, though, as I was saying earlier, the reason why this sort of puts in question the historicity of Jesus himself, because all of a sudden now the temple, or this being post 70, makes it so that the idea of a Messiah claimant before this doesn't really do much until, like, because now you have a reason to believe in a Messiah that happened decades prior, because now you're like, oh, he was here, the Jews missed him, and that's why they lost their temple. So you don't even need a real person anymore. You just need a story about a guy who did some shit. And if you don't have real epistles from a real guy like Paul, that makes it way even more likely that this is just kind of rewritten or just legends, basically.
Well, I suppose from a certain point of view, one can say that, because the historical Paul is not, from my point of view, is nothing like the Paul we've ever imagined. I don't even think he actually converted or even believed in Jesus at all. He was just taking orders from Caiaphas, he was an assassin working for him. That's all he was. And he never converted. The real apostle, so to speak, was Saul of Giscala in the 90s. And he pushed himself, he retrojected himself into the mind of Paul. He hijacked the character, turned him and remade him to be like him and his co-authors. And by the way, there's a document called the Acts of Timothy, which places Timothy, the co-author of many of these letters. He gets killed in Ephesus by worshippers of Artemis in 97 because he interfered in their festival Catagogia. So now, Jacob, that's also a late document, 4th century or later. I'm like, why would somebody make up that Timothy died in the 90s? And why would Jerome invent a story that completely contradicts his entire chronology of Paul in his works? Jerome thinks Paul died under Nero. He believes in the beheading story, which we know is made up. And yet he presents us with this information that contradicts everything he said about Paul, practically. Moves the chronology further into the future, has him outliving Nero, being a young man during the war. And Jerome just briefly mentions it a couple of times, but he leaves it alone. I see a similar thing that happened. I talk about this in my paper. Charles Travers Wood, I believe is his name. He's a scholar about a century ago. He in a footnote, he kind of thought it was awkward that Jerome placed Saul of Giscala, who's supposed to be Paul, during and after the war. He doesn't know what to make of it. He just puts it in a footnote and leaves it alone. Just like Jerome does. He briefly mentions it 2 times and never talks about it again. And I can see why, because what do you do with that? What are the implications if that's exactly what it looks like? That man's pseudo Paul. He's the one pretending to be Paul. He's the one behind the letters. Even Jerome implies that in his commentary on Philemon. Then he just leaves it alone. So anyway, let's pull up this thing from Eusebius. I have it shared. And they indeed accurately indicated the time, for they recorded that in the 15th year of Domitian, Flavia Domitilla, daughter of a sister of Flavius Clement, who at the time was one of the consuls of Rome, who was exiled with many others to the island of Pontia in consequence of testimony borne to Christ. Now, why am I bringing this up? So right here, Eusebius makes a connection between Flavius Clement, which is often dismissed, like, Clement's a common name. Well, it's not a super common name, but it's a name of a few people. It's enough to say that it's not a totally infrequent name either. But here is where Eusebius gives the better evidence here, the stronger evidence that, okay, he actually is thinking about Titus Flavius Clemens, the consul, when he's thinking about Clement of Rome. So unless you want to believe that Eusebius is duplicating the person, because let me step back for a second. Before Eusebius, nobody tells us, no text that we currently have tells us that Clement died under Trajan. It is not until Eusebius that we get that story. Dio Cassius, a Roman historian, tells us that Titus Flavius Clemens was killed for succumbing to Jewish ways. That right there establishes another connection between Clemens and what Eusebius is talking about. By the way, while I'm on that subject, somebody might tell me, but Jacob, Clement was a bishop. Clemens was a consul. There can be no connection between them. Well, I want everybody to read First Clement, all of it. You know, if you don't even want to read all of it, word search the word bishop. Show me one place, one time that the Clement in that letter called himself a bishop. The answer might surprise you. He never does.
Yeah, and that's
There's
also
not a single time in that letter where he ever says he's a bishop.
Bishops is like a later idea, too.
The word bishop is used in First Clement, but the way it's used is different.
Talking about episcopos, bishop, overseer. It means the overseer, basically. The word bishop is an English word.
Yeah, that's true. So
is that what he uses? Episcopos? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember. But what I'll say is
the way they would use that word in the first century is not the way it's used in like the 4th century.
Yeah, because even when you look at the pastoral epistles, even when you look at those, which I think was written by the same person that I'm talking about, Salugoscala, the word bishop is thrown around loosely, and nobody's identified strictly as a bishop. Like the word is thrown around generically in a way. Well, not generically, that's the wrong way of putting it, but he's just throwing it around, tossing it around, and it's not clear who's a bishop and who's not. And the pastorals are coming up with regulations.
Yeah, that's all like 4th century inventions.
Well,
maybe 3rd century, I would say. But
yeah, I think what was happening,
they go back and they look in Paul's epistles. This is literally what they do. Romans 16. You can literally go to Romans 16. Actually, I'll do it right now. Let me just go. Sure. Let me pull this up. Let me first put this down. If you go to Romans 16, watch this. Where's my screen? Okay, so this is Galatians. Let me just go to Romans 16. And you'll see he's naming off people left and right. Phoebe, Prisca, Aquila, Epaenetus, Andronicus, Junia, Urbanus, Apelles, and then like you have Perses, Rufus, that's a big one, Phlegon, Hermes, Petrobolus, Hermas. All these people that I just named are all on the list of the early bishops of the church, and they all just happen to be in the letter of Paul. And it doesn't make any sense because Paul's writing a letter to a church in Rome. It's one church. He's not writing to all the bishops in all the cities. So what happened? Did they get this letter and then they're like, I have an idea. Hey, you, Phlegon, you go to this city. Hermas, you go to Athens. You go to Corinth. Hermas, you go to Philippi. Philologus, you go to Sinope. And you know what I'm saying? That didn't happen. That's mythology. That's made. That's crazy to think that would happen. But if you look at Eusebius's list of bishops, I wonder if I can look at Eusebius's.
While you looked it up, my position is the bishop system, as I'll call it, was formulated, I think, by Salugoscala and his co-authors in the 90s. I think that's when it began. The pastorals and Philippians, and Bob Price likes to call Philippians the 4th pastoral letter, and I can see why he does. because there's a lot of similarities. I think the letters are setting it up, and that's why it looks convoluted. It looks messy and not so like nobody's clearly identified as a bishop of this and that. That's because they're just getting started.
Yeah, there is no
so I think it was. I think this. So I don't. As I say, I think the system was being created in the 90s. That's my view.
This might be it right here. Yeah, here we go. So you got the bishops of Rome, the popes, Peter, Linus, right? Clement. They're all on that list. Here's Jerusalem: James, Simeon, Justus, Zacchaeus, all familiar names. Alexandria, you have Mark, Antioch, St. Peter, Evodius, Ignatius, Ephesus, Timothy. He's mentioned in the letters. Titus, he's mentioned in the letters. Yeah. Dionysius, he's mentioned in the letters. He hangs out with Paul. And so these are all people that Paul's writing these. These are people that are mentioned, and this is not even close to all of them. Remember I mentioned Philologus? Right?
Yeah, you're probably gonna
Philologus, numbered among the 70, first bishop of Sinope. Where is it? Does it say? It doesn't say, but he is. Anyways, everyone knows that. I don't know why it's not on here. But then look at this one. Look at this guy right here, Petrobus, bishop of Neapolis. He's another person mentioned in the letter of Paul. Look, it says right here. Paul greets him in the epistle of Romans. We're talking about Romans 16. Let's see if it has a. See, look, Romans 16:14 right there. See it? Now watch.
Yeah, I agree. I get your point.
I'm just telling the audience. Linus, look at Linus mentioned in what is it? Romans 16.
Let me add to your point just real fast before you continue.
Just finish that point. Gaius also mentioned Romans 16:23. Philologus, I just mentioned him. Every single, all the first bishops of all the cities, there's 70 of them. Look at this is a painting of them right here.
Yeah,
these 70 guys are all people that are mentioned in the epistles of Paul. So that the idea that he wrote this letter to Rome that mentions 12 people, and then he wrote another letter to Corinth that mentions like 7 more people, and they all just were like, "Hey, you're mentioned in Paul's letter. Now go be the bishop of this other city that you never lived in before. Just go move there right now. Take your whole family with you." Like that didn't happen. That's just made up. You know?
Yeah. I can believe that the original leadership was in Jerusalem. I don't really have a problem with that. But when they start saying that it's elsewhere, that's when the nonsense starts coming in.
Yeah, it's a Jerusalem.
And by the way, that actually fits book 1 of the recognitions because
it's a Jerusalem that spreads into Alexandria and into Antioch, and then from there it sort of just kind of spreads around from city to city.
So here's what I'm going with this. So we go back to Clemens. I'm with those, and I know how some are going to feel about this. Like, their names other people. I don't deny that. But here's my point. It's an interesting combination of things that I find intriguing. That is, when you see in Philippians, you have a discussion about both Clement and Epaphroditus. I'm going to mention the pesky Caesar's household. I'm going to mention that too. I know how some are going to think that it doesn't have to be what it looks like, but let's integrate all the evidence. I'm not even gonna talk about Philippians right now. I'm gonna come back to that. I want to bring 1st and 2nd Thessalonians into the conversation. I'm gonna bring those things back here, and then I'm gonna circle back to Philippians and make a point that ties it all together. So in 1st Thessalonians, you have this thing about the wrath of God that came upon Jerusalem. 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16. Let's bring that up. Now, I talk about this in my paper. 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16. You know what? I might even have it in my slides. Give me a second.
I thought you said pull it up. Okay.
Give me a second.
And we were talking, another thing we were going to bring up, maybe not this one, but the idea of the Messiah thing. The author of Paul's letters is essentially tapping into one of the suffering Messiah motif guy, the Christ crucified figure. You know what I mean? And this is something you do find in Judaism and in this time period in that like Qumran community. You know, there's the next coming of Zerubbabel, and then the other one I think is the priestly one. There's a priestly one and a king one. There's a triumphant one and a suffering one. I'm not sure exactly which one's which, but it's in here. Did you find it?
I did. Let me share screens. Okay. Here we go. We also constantly give thanks to God for this, that when you received the word of God that you heard from us, you accepted it. Not as a human word, but as what it really is, God's word, which is also at work in you believers. For you, brothers and sisters, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. For you suffered the same things from your own compatriots as I did from the Jews who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. They displeased God and oppose everyone by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so that they may be saved. Thus they have constantly been filling up the measure of their sins, but wrath has overtaken them at last. So wrath has overtaken them at last. I want people to pay attention to that. That's past tense. The wrath has already happened. This is not prophecy. This isn't something pretending to be prophecy. This has happened. The wrath of God has come upon the Jews, what they had done to Jesus. That's what 1 Thessalonians is saying. You know what that lines up with? Mm-hmm. Church fathers talking about Origen misreading Josephus. He thought that the death of James caused the war, even though Josephus never said that. The deaths of Jesus or James, depending on the church, which church father you read, is connected to the wrath of God upon the Jews. You see my point? 1 Thessalonians is making the same point that the church fathers would later make. That the death, because the Jews are being blamed for Jesus' death, and so the result of that, wrath has come upon them for what they had done. Josephus says the same stuff. Josephus actually says the same kind of stuff like this. He said the wrath came upon the Galileans. The wrath came upon the Jews, and that's because they didn't follow God and they lost their temple. He says stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised if 1 Thessalonians was ripping off Josephus, because it sounds like him here. He's making the same kind of arguments. The only difference is that 1 Thessalonians blames the death of Jesus for the cause, not.
You know what says it is that this is actually sounds like if we're assuming as an axiom for 1 second that this was written after 70, and this sounds like a reason why the temple was destroyed, because it says right here, you suffered the same things from your own compatriots as they did from the Jews who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. They displeased God. See, they displease God and oppose everyone by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so that they may be saved. This sounds like a cope mechanism going on of what happened. And now bring that to when is this one dated to? The scroll, this Rule of the Congregation scroll. I'm trying to look it up right now. Rule of the Congregation dated to, hold on, let me just read it. I just looked that up for a second.
Sure.
It's dated between 100 BC and like 50 B. It's first century BC. And if you read it, first century BC, it is this is what it says. It says, "This is the sitting of the men of renown called to the assembly for the council of the community when God will have begotten the Messiah." Begotten the Messiah. I would love to actually look at this Hebrew, or maybe it's is it Aramaic or let's see. It's written in. Doesn't say on this. It's probably Hebrew. It's from it might be Hebrew. Anyways, whatever it is, I would love to look at the language here. Oh, now my mouse is not working all of a sudden. What the hell just happened? Are you there?
I'm here. That's strange.
Oh, now it's working. That's weird. Just start working again. Okay. So God will have begotten the Messiah. Again, I'm reading an English translation. I don't know what this word is. I don't know if it has to do with a son of God, maybe. But it just says right here, God will have begotten the Messiah. And we'll check this later and talk about it maybe. Among them, the priest shall enter at the head of all the congregation of Israel. Then are the chiefs of the sons of Aaron, the priests, called the assembly, men of renown. and they shall sit before him, each according to his rank. Afterwards, the Messiah of Israel shall enter. The chiefs of the tribes of Israel shall sit before him, each according to his rank, according to their position in the camps during their marches. Then all the heads of the family of congregation, together with the wise men of the congregation, shall sit before them, each according to his rank. That was just a waste of time, this whole paragraph. Anyways, this is redundant. Just keep repeating itself. They're all going to get together. We get it. And when they gather for their community table, they literally says it again, to drink wine. This is important. I'm going to take us back to Paul. I promise. I'm not going off, and this is going to bring us back to Paul. To drink wine and arrange the community table and mix the wine to drink. Let no man stretch out his hand over the first fruits of bread and wine before the priest. For it is he who shall bless the first fruits of bread and wine, the Messiah. The Messiah blesses the bread and wine. What does that remind you of? And shall first stretch out his hand over the bread, and afterwards the Messiah of Israel shall stretch out his hands over the bread. There's a lot of repeating, a lot of redundant repeating on this. And afterwards, all the congregation of the community shall bless each according to his rank. What's this note? Oh, it's giving you the exact papyri. Now, look at this. This guy even writes that probably the idea of a dual Messiah did not disappear with this sect, which came to an end. So there's another, and then they think there's another Messiah coming. A triumphant one comes later, Simon ben Kokba, but if he fails, though. But you can see the idea. You can see what Messianic Judaism producing these heroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
it also reminds me of the Eucharist.
That's what I was going to say. The reason why this links me to Paul is because in Paul, when he talks about the night he was handed over in Corinthians, what's that? Corinthians. I
think it might be in 15.
11.
I can't remember.
I think it's 11. I think. Let's find it. Hold on. Look it up. Can you just check right now? I'll go to it right now because I want to read that right now, and I want to see.
You're right. It's in 11. It's 11, 23, 29.
Okay. Now the reason why did I really lose my Bible passage already? I got back to Cross Bible again. All right. Who cares? I always click out of my tabs when I still need them. So you said it's what? Corinthians 11,
23, 29.
Okay. This is actually really important. And there's a reason why. Because Corinthians 11, 23, 29, he says, for I received from the Lord what also I pass on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup. This is the cup of the new covenant. And there's the wine, the blood. Do this whenever you drink it, remember me, whatever. And whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So whoever eats the bread and drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is one of the most important passages in Paul's letters of why people think the historical Jesus this is the evidence for the historical Jesus, because people will say, what is Paul talking about here? Who was this person he's talking about who blesses this cup and then on the night he was handed over and arrested? Why? That sounds like a historical event. It doesn't sound like mythology because it's not. The Gospels are after this, right? However, now, if this is after 70, now all he's doing is he's just explaining a messianic trope that's very popular, and it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right? You there?
Yeah. I agree.
Oh, you're just thinking about it? It's a lot. This is crazy. I mean, if you think about it, this is kind of a weird thing that no one talks about. How this idea of a Eucharist. By the way, guess who else mentions a Eucharist? Philo. Philo talks about the Son of God, who's called the Logos, who will be, he says, he will be the cup that all of the world will drink from for salvation. That's what he says. I can find that while you're presenting the next source that you want to bring. or I don't know if you have any more.
I have another one. Let's pull it up. It's from 1 Corinthians.
Yeah, and this is
it lines up with what I said about 1 Thessalonians.
okay.
This
Cool.
is 1 Corinthians 3:15 to 20.
Give me the super chat.
Yeah,
Sonic, $5.
Thank you, super chat.
Yeah, very compelling and well thought out. When and where will your paper be released? Talking about you. Also looking forward to your book. Thank you, Desonics. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Desonics. I don't know. That depends on Alex Criddle. Alex Criddle is the managing editor of Bob Price's journal. That depends on when he gets around to it. He's a one-man army over there.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let everybody know. I do not have the slightest clue when it's coming out, but I already sent him the final draft back in July. So it depends on when he gets it done. So let's read this verse. Let's read these verses. If the work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The builder will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Do not deceive yourselves. If you think that you are wise in this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. So I thought I included it here. Oh, I did. It's the first verse I put in here. So I believe 1 Corinthians is making an argument about why a building to God does not need to exist again, because it's subject to the flames. Now God and Jesus dwell within you. God dwells in you now. The body is the temple. This again lines up perfectly with 1 Thessalonians. The wrath is past tense. It's already happened. They paid the price for killing Jesus. It's already saying that stuff. So in 1 Corinthians, now it's talking about we don't need buildings anymore to worship God. The Spirit's inside of us now, man. We've moved on from that stuff. God dwells within you. We don't need a building to God anymore. We don't need a temple to Him anymore. Now, kind of a bold thing to say before 70 makes perfect sense afterwards. And again, lines up with 1 Thessalonians 2:13 to 16 perfectly. The wrath's already come. So, in my paper, I point out scholarship in a small way agrees that there might be a problem with the genuine letters of Paul. But here's what they'll do, and I can't stand this. 1 Thessalonians 2:13 to 16 is an interpolation. I talk about that in my paper. There is no evidence it's an interpolation. There is zero manuscript evidence that it's an interpolation. Zero. But some scholars will say that it's an interpolation because they can't think about how that makes sense before 70. So there are some scholars out there that believe that 1 Thessalonians is by Paul, except for those 3 verses, because it's inconvenient. Like, you can't do that. You can't take out what you don't like. That's not how this works. Now, if you produce a manuscript of it where it's missing, that's a different story. The closest they can get to all of that missing in a manuscript is in a Latin manuscript. I'll talk about that in my paper. I forget what it's called. There's a Latin manuscript 1,000 years later. You have to wait 1,000 years to get at least some of that to be missing. And they say, oh, where it is, we have one manuscript that's super late. I'm like, okay, here's the problem. It might have been a good argument, except for one major flaw. Because this Latin manuscript is that late. And by the way, just so people understand, it is not consensus. There are people on the internet lying. There's even some authors lying that 1 Thessalonians 2:13 to 16 is interpolation, it's consensus. It's not. That is an absolute lie. Anyone saying that to you is a liar. That is literally a lie. Let me continue. So, 1 Thessalonians 2:13 to 16, you got a manuscript where I can't remember if it's some or all of it, but the information is in my paper. It's 1,000 years later. Now, what does that mean? Well, Marcion's version of 1 Thessalonians already misses a good deal of that. So I think that this Latin manuscript is omitting that material largely, if not entirely, because it knew Marcion's text. You can't rule out that it's being influenced by Marcion, because Marcion cut down the letters in 144 CE. It validates that manuscript as evidence, in my view, because it's too darn late to be admissible evidence that it's an interpolation. And the text would, the author of it would almost certainly have known Marcion. So you can't rule that out. So it just goes down the toilet. But even if they got lucky and that whole thing was an interpolation, we can wish it away successfully. What about this? What do we do with 1 Corinthians 3:15-20? I suppose that's an interpolation too, and everything else in 1 Corinthians is conveniently by Paul. Come on. Come on. You see, now, if that doesn't start sounding ridiculous, I don't know what will. So now we're removing anything that makes it sound like it's post-70 so we can rescue the surrounding material and make that before. And this is exactly why I don't believe in interpolation arguments. I don't believe in theoretical interpolations. Show me a manuscript where it's missing or an external witness showing that it's missing, and then we can have a conversation about it. But you can't put on glasses like it's the movie They Live, and you can see, oh, these magic glasses show me which parts of it's missing. No, you can't do that. You can't know that. You put 50 scholars in a room about Proto-Mark. You have 50 scholars that believe in an earlier version of Mark they can't prove existed. You're going to get a different answer about which part of Mark goes back. You see my point?
Oh yeah,
it's not reliable. It's massively circular. That's why I don't buy into it. So people get mad at me that I don't accept interpolations. I'm like, if you don't believe me, look at research the scholarship, and you're going to get a million different answers about what's interpolation and what's not, and that's why I reject it.
By the way, speaking of circularity, Nina Livesey makes a great point when in her book about Paul's letters being forgeries.
Yeah.
She makes a really good point, is that the methodology that scholars have been relying on for the last 200 years to determine that there's 7 authentic epistles of Paul. Now, anyone who's watching this might not know might not understand that in the 13 epistles of Paul, or the total amount of Pauline epistles, 13. Yes. Only 7 of them, so about half of them, are scholars think are authentic, and that is because those other 6 that are not authentic have different grammar, different syntax. They're just written differently. They're like someone else wrote that. And now Christian apologists will say it was Paul's secretary, which is like just coping. It's just like it's not, you lose all logic when it comes to Occam's razor. You're done. You're not convincing. You're just reaching. Now,
in fact, the co-authors make it worse, but continue. I'll save it for later.
Yeah, but we're going to go even beyond that. The 7 authentic letters, the only reason why they're agreed to be authentic is because those 7 look like they are written by the same author. By most people think that. There are a few who think that. Some of them don't. But most people think that those 7 are authored by the same person. Therefore, it's Paul. Now, she says, but how do we know that those 7 are also not forgeries written by the same person who forged all 7?
Exactly.
It's circular reasoning. You determined this is how Paul writes, because these 7 are all written the same. So that's how Paul writes. So that those 6 are fake, but these 7 are real because that's how Paul writes. But how did you determine that's how Paul writes? You determine that's how Paul writes because the 7 agree, and the 7 agree because they're Paul, and Paul is real because of the 7. And the 7 is real because of Paul. It's circular reasoning. You cannot determine. We don't know whether it's a real letter. Another thing she pointed out is these are moral epistles. And this is a genre that was floating around in this time period. Seneca writes his own epistles. They're not real. They're meant to be published for everyone to read.
There's even a forgery of Paul and Seneca.
Yeah, they're exactly. There's actually a letter from Paul to Seneca, and vice versa. And we know those aren't real. So number one, we already know that there's forgeries. So why should we be skeptical of more forgeries when we already know there is forgeries? Imagine being in the court of law and I got caught lying to the judge. Are you going to take my word seriously ever again for the rest of the case? No. Everything I say now has to be up to scrutiny. But why aren't these 7 letters up to scrutiny? No one knows. And then you have the idea that these are moral epistles, clearly philosophical, clearly stoic, clearly have some They're meant to be read in a church, and they are read in church. They're literally copied and sent to churches to be read out loud. That's not what a private letter looks like. Next, you have she points out that the Greek, the second sophistic style of Paul's Greek, is more likely to be 2nd century Greek than 1st century Greek. There are some examples of similar Greek in the 1st century, but the majority of 2nd sophistic style Greek is what you find like Lucian, for example. Let me just show them what I mean by this. 2nd sophistic.
While you do that, pull up Nina's book. I put an image of her book here so everybody knows.
I got it already. But yeah, I'll show that in a second. I got it right here. It's right here. So this is 2nd sophistic Greek, literally historical, referring to Greek writers who flourished from the reign of Nero. So we're talking late towards the end of the 1st century up until the 3rd century. And Paul's Greek just happens to be in line with 2nd sophistic style, with like Lucian and Philostratus and Dio and all these, Plutarch as well. And so that's another strike against these being authentic. Not only that, she points out that how Marcion was, and this is what you might disagree with, how Marcion was. This is part of Marcion's canon, which is another weird kind of like 2nd century thing that you would find. Marcion's mostly a 2nd century phenomena, early 2nd century. So he's the first person to come around with the New Testament. Anyways, there's a lot of reasons she gives, and I think they're strong reasons. So.
Now, here's where things get interesting, is that she places Acts before Marcion. That's her book, everybody. I really recommend you get this book. Yeah. It's an amazing book. She makes she makes several of the same points I made years before it came out, and others have made. It's a really good book. Go get it, because when you read this book, you're going to lose your confidence that these letters are genuine. You'll never think about Paul the same way ever again. Read that book.
Really good points, dude. She makes really, really good points, dude.
Read that book.
And I also wanted to, if I can, I wanted to go to Philo real quick, because we were talking about the idea of a Messiah and how the Eucharist is tied to him. So everyone knows that Philo constantly talks about the firstborn Son of God. Now, if anyone doesn't know, this is before Philo lived in the 1st century BC, all the way up until the middle of the 1st century CE. So he's around from like 20 BC to like 50 AD. Right. And you can see he talks about the firstborn of God, huios theou, and he calls them a logos. So the translation, just to show people, there are if there be any unfit to be called son of God, let him press to take his place under the firstborn, God's firstborn, the word, or the tone logon, the logos, who holds the eldership among the angels, their ruler as it was, and many names are his. He's called the beginning. And that Greek is the word arche right here. That is a buzzword that you find in Platonist Stoic circles, the arche, the ruler, the beginning. That's so, okay, so you have that, but I also really wanted to show, but no one talks about this. I think I'm the only person who really talks about this. I'm writing a book, and this is a big chapter in my book. Is in this chapter called On Dreams, he describes the Eucharist, dude. He describes the Eucharist. Not only does he describe the Eucharist, it's a replacement. It's a replacement for the temple, where you used to have to go to Yom Kippur and get salvation, get your sins forgiven through a ritual of a burnt offering and a scapegoat. Now Philo talks about we don't need that anymore. What is it? How does he explain that? This is what he says. He says this logos, tone logon, accusative, which one of Moses' company compared to a river, when he said, and see the flowing of water, right? There's a water motif. When he said in the Psalms, the river of God is full of water. When surely it were senseless to suppose that the words can properly refer to any of the rivers on earth. No, Philo says. No. It's not a river on earth. He's talking about the divine logos. Talk about Theon Logon right here. Talk about the divine Logos, the Son of God that we just heard about. He's the stream of water. He is full of the stream of wisdom, of Sophia. And he says, with no part of it empty or devoid of itself, as it has been called, filled through and through with the influx and lifted up on high by the constant, never failing outflow from the perennial fountain. And there is another psalm which runs thus: the strong current of the river makes glad the city of God. This is where I'm getting into the replacement of the temple. What city? For the existing holy city, where the sacred temple also is, does not stand in the neighborhood of rivers any more than of the sea. Thus, it is clear that he writes to show us allegorically. He's not physical, not really. It's not really Jerusalem. It's an allegory. He's saying, and allegorically something different from the obvious. It is perfectly true that the impetuous rush of the divine word, the divine logos, borne along swiftly and ceaselessly with the strong, ordered current, does overflow and gladden the whole universe, cosmos, right? The whole universe through and through. For God's city is the name, in one sense, for the world. He's talking about, it's not even about Jerusalem, it's about the whole world. You can see the universalism here, right? Which has received the whole bowl. And this actually word right here can mean cup too. Cup, bowl, crater, something to hold something in, right? That's what it means. So you can say, you got cratera, ton cratera to theu tomatos. And wherein the divine draught is mixed. So this is talking about the divine draught, the cup. I hate this translation, dude. It's almost like this is like someone went out of their way to make it sound less like a Eucharist. Because think about this. The divine draught is mixed and feasted thereon and exaltedly taken for its possession the gladness which remains for all time, never to be removed or quenched. It's like eternal salvation from this divine draught. In another sense, he uses this name for the soul of the sage, in which God is said to walk as in the city. For I will walk in you, he says, and I will be your God. And when the happy soul holds out the sacred goblet, weird translation. Look, there's not even a space between sacred and goblet. Weird. And then look at this right here. Yerus kuathus. That's the same word that you would use for the cup of Dionysus, by the way. Did you know that? It's a wine. It's literally a wine cup. Let me show you what I'm talking about right now. So that word right there, kuathos, watch this. He's talking about this right here. Wine mixer. Isn't that crazy? So Philo literally says he uses a specific word used for mixing wine in as a graceful shape resembling a teacup. The terracotta kuathos was used as a ladle for dipping diluted wine from a wine mixer. So you would go in, and that's why it uses the bowl before that. So you're going in with your kuathos and you're dipping it in, and you're drinking from the cup of God Himself through His logos. All right, now let's go back to the text, because it's hard. If you read the translation, you're not going to catch it. You got to know what these words are. So then he says, happy souls who holds out the sacred goblet, and it's Yerus kuathus. And it says, of true gladness, but the word, capital W, right? The word, the logos, the noun is a noun, person. The cupbearer, there's that tomatos again, of God, the cupkos of God, and master of the feast, kind of reminds me of what I read in Qumran, right? That Qumran thing, who is also none other than the drought which he pours. Let me ask you, what do you think that means right there?
The drought that which he pours, it kind of reminds me. I don't know if this answers your question, but it kind of reminds me of when Jesus told his followers that my body is bread and my blood is wine.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
He is none other than the drought which he pours. He is the drought. He is the wine. He is the bread. Philo literally explains this. He says, the word, the logos, who is the cupbearer, holds out the sacred goblet, but he is none other than the drought which he pours. He is the drink. You're drinking God. You're literally drinking God. Now watch this. It gets even more clearer in this last sentence. His own self, free from all dilution, the delight, the sweetening, the exhilaration, the merriment, the ambrosian drug. Ambrosion. You know what that is? You know what ambrosia is? Let me just show the audience this. Ambrosia is literally, I'm not kidding. This is so proto-Christianity. There's nothing you can tell me to convince me that this is nothing. The Christianity is not coming from this. The word ambrosia literally means immortality. It's literally drinking immortality. And it's used by Homer and other authors as the food and drink which the gods on Olympus eat and drink on a daily basis to stay gods. Isn't that something? So let's finish this. Let's finish up this sentence, right? So what do we got? So what does he say? He says, the merriment, the ambrosian, the eternal, what's the immortal, the drug of immortality, I guess you would say. The drug of immortality, or you can just say ambrosian drug. That's fine. That whatever you want to say. You want to emphasize ambrosia, but you could say the drug of immortality. What is the drug of immortality? It's the Eucharist. And then he says, to borrow from the poets. He literally says like it says ambrosion hina kai autoi poetikos, which means in order to take from the poets. He's like, let me borrow from the poets for a second. Talking about Homer, whose medicine, whose pharmacon brings you cresomatha, gladness, greatness. So what did we just hear? What was that? There's a long passage. I hope I didn't bore anybody. I hope I was reading it in a way that was exciting, because what we just heard from Philo is that Philo is saying that Jerusalem is going to be replaced by a Son of God figure who's called the Logos, or Word of God, as in John, and he will give you a cup of immortality. And if you drink from this immortality, you're literally drinking him. I don't know what else to tell you guys. How do you not see that's the Eucharist, right? But you'd be surprised. No one talks about this passage. It's not a lot of papers written about it. I don't know if I haven't seen any actually. So that's, to me, that's like when I see Paul talking about the night he was handed over and he broke bread. It doesn't necessarily yeah, that could be a real event that happened, and that could be the basis of the Eucharist. But this sounds a lot stronger to me of the real basis of the Eucharist. This is an actual doctrine in Hellenistic Judaism that was already becoming a thing at this time period.
I think it's a good argument. There's a couple of super chats.
Go ahead.
I'd like to take real quick before we
this one
continue. Yeah, Stephen, thank you for your super chat. I guess my question is, what's the motive? Why write those letters at all, and why choose an anti-Jesus assassin as their protagonist? Well, it's a good question, and here's my answer to that. What were their options? They didn't have much. If you forge, let's say you're Sulla Viscala, right, and I place him in 94, 97 C, that's when I think about all 13 of those letters during those 3 years. Mostly during the end of Domitian's reign, and some letters shortly after that, immediately and after. in 97, when Domitian was assassinated in late 96 CE. So you can't plausibly put these views on James the Brother, because James the Brother didn't have views like this. He was more of a Torah Orthodox Jew, and not this guy that was anti-circumcision or interested in the idea that the body is the temple of God. That's not the kinds of things that James would have been saying. So you can't put that in his mouth. You can't put any of these words in Cephas's mouth either. That doesn't work. So what was their options then?
You know what's weird about that? This is such a contradiction, real quick, and not to cut you off. In Acts, it's Peter who has a dream that we no longer have to eat all these foods anymore. We're good. But in the letters, in Galatians, Peter's the one who won't even sit with the fucking Gentiles because they're so fucking disgusting to him. That doesn't make any. That doesn't sound like Peter. Which one of those is wrong? One of those is lying.
Yeah, I think Acts is the one that's lying, and I'm going to come back to that because there's more I can say about it. With the whole Aretas business, which is another BCE to CE fiasco that you were talking about with Cascala, and we'll come back to that in a second. But Paul was I think was basically their only real option, because that I can think of, because again they can't put these views on James, they can't put these views on Peter, Cephas, or other individuals. And the reason why I put it that way is because there are some that even debate if Cephas and Peter are the same person, but I'm not going to get into that. That's a mess. Acts is the first one that will really even go beyond 1st and 2nd Peter, and will really try to massage Peter and turn him into a Gentile loving guy. It's like everybody's singing Kumbaya and having fun. Everybody agrees with each other in Acts. Everybody agrees with each other. It's everything. Everybody's on board and got it all figured out. Whereas in the epistles, it's just utterly chaos, left and right. And so the epistles, in my view, are already trying to downplay how aggressive the historical Paul was to the Nazarenes. Because the original Paul, he was a killer. He was an assassin. He was like, he's not arguing with nobody. He's just going out there killing. Whereas the guy of the epistles is doing the exact opposite. It's like, oh, I was a persecutor. It doesn't explain what it means by he was a persecutor. And he just wants to argue and change people's minds. Yeah, I can get heated, but I'm just a theologian. I'm a preacher over here trying to change people's minds. But in Acts, it's not even that anymore. Oh, we're all in agreement. It's a party. Let's have a party, guys. Everybody's in agreement. So you see a progression where violence is removed. Now it's arguments, and then everybody's in agreement. The only exception to this is the death of Stephen. Stephen is killed in Acts, and it says that Saul approved of his death, which sounds just like what happened to James. In fact, I'm convinced that the Stephen story is just a ripoff of what happened to James, because they have that element in common. Saul approves of the death. That's in common between Book 1 and Recognitions and Acts. And the reason Acts changed it, I think, is a simple one. You don't want Paul trying to kill James, the brother of Jesus. That contradicts what Acts is trying to do. It will even undo what Galatians has done. You can't do that. So to say, actually, it was the Stephanus in 1 Corinthians. That's the guy that got killed. Greetings to the household of Stephanus in 1 Corinthians. That's the Stephen that gets killed. That's the guy that gets killed, not James. We can't have that. So they took somebody else, a totally different dude, and pretended that was a guy that Saul was involved in killing. That wasn't about James. And so that's how Acts gets around that problem. And by the way, just to be clear, I think Acts was borrowing from Zacchaeus' letter that talked about the attack on James and Abdias of Babylon to get the rest of the information about James being killed. Now, here's what's interesting. Acts changes the manner of how the person in question is killed. Instead of being killed with a fuller's club in the late 30s, he's killed by stoning, which is the way that James, the so-called brother of Jesus, and Josephus dies. He gets killed by stoning. The apocalypses of James, which mention the same James that Josephus is talking about, those two texts actually tell you that James isn't even Jesus' real brother. He's a spiritual brother, in that Theuda was his father, and it says that James was stoned to death by the Jewish authorities. New Testament scholar John Painter makes a connection between how the apocalypses portray James's death with how Josephus portrays the so-called brother of Jesus' death. It's the same death. It's the same situation. And so that's another piece of evidence that I use to argue that the James that Josephus was talking about wasn't Jesus' brother, despite what he says. And no, I do not argue it's an interpolation, because that would be hypocritical and that goes against my principles. We don't have manuscript evidence that the James passage is interpolation. So I argue that Josephus himself, which wouldn't be the first time he made a mistake. There are errors in Josephus that I'm not going to get into, but I think Josephus is more likely to have made a mistake rather than a later interpolator accidentally shoving it in there, which some people argue that doesn't make any sense to me. It would make more sense if Josephus, who was not a Christian, could screw it up. It's like, James' spiritual brother, James' brother, that confuses me. I'm just going to briefly mention this guy and drop it, which is what he does. He quickly mentions him and just moves on to the next guy. He says, oh, yeah, that James is the brother of Jesus called the Christ, Legomeno Christu, and yeah, he gets killed by Ananus or whatever. Moving on. I feel like Josephus is quickly mentioning him because he doesn't want to deal with the complexity and deal with the claims. Like, he's just going to say, James, the brother of Jesus called the Christ, and leave that whole mess alone beyond that. So anyway, back to my point. I think Paul was their best shot. It's like, oh, Paul hated the Nazarenes. So it would make sense that he had these weird, funky views. So they latched on to him and they gave him all these narratives and stories. And the reason they did this, I think there's a couple of reasons they did this. The church was going through hell in the 90s because I'm bringing in the Clemens thing back into the picture. And I think the real reason Clemens was killed by Domitian, it had nothing to do with his religion. That was just an excuse. I think the real reason he was killed was because Domitian was afraid that this guy could become emperor. As a relative of the Flavians, he was a candidate to be emperor. But Domitian had him killed, and a dead man can't rule. So he eliminates the problem by getting rid of Clemens. We're also told, I can't remember where, I can't remember if it was Suetonius or Cassius Dio or somebody else, but there is a Roman historian that says that Domitian wanted to return to the old ways, which is interesting. He wanted to go back to Roman traditional views. Now, what could that possibly mean? Well, I think it's because Vespasian and Josephus were interested in, and by the way, this is also a thing with Rabbinic Judaism, because if you read the Talmud, they talk about the idea about Vespasian being the Messiah, which Josephus, in a different way, talks about that Vespasian is the one who was foretold by the oracles, and that's the way he puts it. And so Domitian's like, I don't want nothing to do with all this stuff. I'm against what Vespasian did. I'm against all this stuff, and that's why he gets rid of Clemens. He doesn't want nothing to do with any of these Jewish connections that his family was interested in. It's like, let's just get rid of all that and go back to our old ways. And so he gets rid of Clemens. And then Epaphroditus, he has him killed. He actually has him killed first before he gets to having Clemens executed. This is in 95 CE. That's when this happened, by the way. Epaphroditus is killed first. And the reason he chose for him to be killed is Epaphroditus was involved in Nero, helping Nero commit suicide. I'm like, really? You're going to have him killed like 30 years later for that? Like 28 years later? That's just another excuse. It's not a coincidence that he wants him dead and he wants Clemens dead in the same year. He's just trying to find excuses and to get it done. But in reality, he's trying to clean house from his point of view so he can restore things back to the way he thinks that they should be. And the Christians are not the primary target, but they are caught in the middle of the persecution because of Clemens. And I have to constantly make this point because I'll have people telling me, there was no persecution of the Christians by Domitian. Well, I agree to a point. They weren't the primary target. But to pretend they weren't caught in the middle at all is just laughable. That's why First Clement's concerned with the matter. That's why it talks about another persecution befalling them in the first place. It was a concern. And that takes me back to First and Second Thessalonians. So First Thessalonians talks about we're being persecuted. And the Second Thessalonians elaborates on what that persecution is and who's carrying it out. The son of lawlessness. The son of lawlessness declares himself to be a deity, just like Domitian does. Domitian was like one of 2 Roman emperors in the 1st century to declare himself to be a god while he was still alive. Caligula was the first one to do that in the 1st century. And then Domitian, many decades later, does the same thing. And Domitian said they use the words Lord and God, and Paul Anderson gets into the comparisons between the titles used to refer to Domitian is also reused in the Gospel of John. So there's a lot of Domitianic elements in John, even though I think John was written like 40 years later, 40 years later. I put John like 135 of the Common Era. But what's happening is, I think the letters, and I talk about this in my paper, are talking about the plot to assassinate Domitian, but they're not going to come out and say it because they would all be massacred. They would all be massacred if they outright said it. So they can't say that. So what they do is they say in 2 Thessalonians, Jesus is going to come back and kill the son of lawlessness. It actually says that in there. He's going to come back and kill the son of lawlessness. So what could that possibly mean? Well, my theory is that it's talking about Domitian. But they're spiritualizing it into Jesus is going to do it. Now, let me circle back to 1 Clement, and I'll circle back to the letters. Before anybody says, oh, this is laughable. Christians before 70 thought Jesus was coming back. Are you trying to say that the parousia was fabricated in the 90s? That's exactly what I'm saying. The entire concept of the second coming of Jesus was made up in the 90s as a plot to kill Domitian. Now, before anybody screams at me, it's like, oh, that sounds ridiculous. Let's go to 1 Clement. And I want people to type kingdom of God, God's kingdom, just word search those phrases. You know what you'll see? Or I should say what you won't see. There's not a single time that Clement ever says in that long letter that Jesus is coming back. Not a single time. Find me one sense where he says it, make me look like a fool. But good luck with it. It's not there. The closest you get to it is...
Why would that make it later, though?
Well, I'll tell you why. So let's talk about the fact that Clement talks about a letter by Paul. Scholars think that letter by Paul is 1 Corinthians. That's the standard view. And the reason why is because Clement says that the letter that he's describing talked about different parties led by Apollos and Cephas, which 1 Corinthians chapter 3 talks about as well.
Okay.
So that's why the standard view thinks that. I understand it, but we got a problem because 1 Corinthians is all about talking about the parousia, just like 1 and 2 Thessalonians. It talks about that. It's one of the 3 major letters that talks about the parousia. And Clement never talks about it. That makes no sense. And that silence is quite frankly impossible for me to imagine because Clement is obsessed with the coming of the kingdom. He goes to Isaiah. He goes to Proverbs and I think Psalms as well to talk about the coming of the kingdom. So he's going through the entire Old Testament to try to find references, or at least much of the Old Testament, to try to find references to the coming of the kingdom. It never mentions Jesus' involvement. So if he's desperate to... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so why would not mentioning... Because the second coming seems to be a later... I think is more of a later development.
Well, it is. I'm saying it is a later development. It was made up. I'm saying that the letters engineer it in the 90s, after 1 Clement, shortly after the letter of 1 Clement.
Oh, but you're not saying 1 Clement's actually later.
No, I think 1 Clement was written in the 90s by Clement.
Okay.
And the reason he doesn't know about the parousia because it hadn't been made up yet. He's going to the Old Testament to go find passages about the kingdom of God.
Okay.
That's what Clemens, because I think he wrote it, Clemens is doing. He's going for the Old Testament to go find passages to talk about the kingdom of God. And I think he did that because he was trying to give the church some hope. Like, I know we're going through hell right now and the mission's all over us, but don't worry, God's coming, guys, everybody. The kingdom is coming. Just hold on tight. And I find that strange at the standard view. Because what scholars will do is they'll say the reason Clement talks about it that way is because of the delayed parousia. Because the second coming didn't happen yet. That makes no sense. Clement doesn't talk about it at all. It's not even a thought that Jesus is coming back. The closest that he gets to even saying it, and that's being generous, is when he says that Jesus is the first fruits of the resurrection. That's an exemplar. That's an example. That's not That's not because Jesus is going to come back and initiate it. He never says that. What Clement says is that God is using other forces to usher in the kingdom, not Jesus. So he's going to things like Daniel and elsewhere to talk about some other person, some other entity that will be the mechanism to bring about the kingdom of God on earth, not Jesus.
Mhm.
Now, shortly after First Clement was written, I put First Clement in 93, so just about a year, barely, maybe a year before First Thessalonians was written. And then Saul of Giscala and his co-authors, his buddies, Timothy, Silas, Sosthenes, and Tertius. Some of you may have heard me say Sophanes. I was mispronouncing Sosthenes, the co-author of 1 Corinthians. Anyway, that being said, these people were talking about, I think they were talking about the agenda to assassinate Domitian. And what was happening is, again, like I said earlier, they can't outright say it because that would be stupid. They would all be massacred. And I think Domitian already suspected it as it is. Saul of Giscala was imprisoned. Read Ephesians. Read, because again, I'm saying Saul of Giscala is canonical Paul, but the dude calling himself Paul in these letters, just to be clear. Look at Colossians, look at Ephesians, Philippians, Philemon. What's happening is you got these people being imprisoned. You got Timothy's in prison, Saul's in prison, Epaphroditus, aka Epaphras, is being imprisoned. They're all being these people are being imprisoned left and right. And then they're released. I can't remember which letter, Philippians or Philemon, one of them. I can't remember. But one of those letters has Saul of Giscala, aka canonical Paul, mentioning, "Hey, I'm going to be released soon." But Christians are like, "No, he's about to get his head cut off by Nero." Now let me pivot on that. I've got something to show all of you. I know where the story of Paul 7 under Nero came from. I'm going to show y'all where this came from. I mean, you're going to love this.
Okay.
It's from Josephus. It's a total plagiarism of Josephus. Massive plagiarism of Josephus.
By who?
Lucius Carinus, the author of the Acts of Paul. The story that the man who gave us the death under Nero by Paul. Can you take the super chat off the screen real quick?
Oh yeah, my bad.
We'll go back to it in a second. But thank you for that super chat, John Andrew McDonald. I'll come back to you. Wars of the Jews. It's a book 2, verses 556 to 584. So here's what he says. After this calamity had befallen Cestius, many of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink. You see that? See that sinking ship metaphor? Well, I'm going to come back to that.
Wait. Which part are you talking about?
The first bullet, the second bullet point, when the first paragraph. After this calamity had befallen Cestius, many of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink. You see that? Using a sinking ship metaphor. I'll tell you why that's important in a moment.
What do you mean by metaphor, though? What's the metaphor?
It's a metaphor for the city is being destroyed.
Many of the eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink.
Right. Then Costobarus, therefore, and Saul, who were brethren together with Philip, the son of Jasimus, who was the commander of King Agrippa's forces, ran away from the city and went to Cestius. But then how Antipas, who had been besieged with them in the king's palace, but would not fly away with them, was afterwards slain by the seditious, we shall relate hereafter. However, Cestius sent Saul and his friends at their own desire to Achaia, to Nero, to inform him of the great distress they were in, and to lay the blame of their kindling the war upon Florus, so hoping to alleviate his own danger by provoking his indignation against Florus. So here's what's going on. This is a very dangerous thing that these two guys are doing, these two brothers, Saulus and Costobarus. Saulus and Costobarus are both going to Nero to blame the whole war on Governor Florus. By the way, we never see those two again, chronologically. After Josephus mentions this, they're gone. This is in 66 CE, by the way, when the war was starting. And look at the next passage. In the meantime, the people of Damascus, you see where I'm going with this? So Damascus shows up in the immediate paragraph following this. And it goes on, it says, when they were informed of the destruction of the Romans, set about the slaughter of those Jews that were among them. and as they had them already cooped up together in the place of public exercises, which they had done out of the suspicion that they had of them. So their appearance before Nero, they were probably killed by him, or another thing that I'm thinking about that could be possible is maybe they were killed by Jews that figured out they were working with the Romans. I don't know. But either way, this is the basis for Lucius Carinus to make up that story about Paul getting killed by Nero.
Where's that part? Go to that one now. Let me see what it looks like.
At the Acts of Paul.
Yeah.
This is it. So, and among those, let me start over. And among many others, Paul also brought bound unto whom all his fellow prisoners gave heed. So that Caesar perceived that he was over the camp, and he said to him, though thou art the great king's man, but my prisoner, how thoughtest thou well to come by stealth into the government of the Romans, and levy soldiers out of my province? But Paul, filled with the Holy Ghost, said before them all, Caesar, not only out of thy province do we levy soldiers, but out of the whole world. So hath it have been ordained unto us that no man should be refused who wisheth to serve my king, and if it like thee also to serve him. It is not wealth, nor the splendor that is now in this life, that we shall save thee. But if thou submit and entreat him, thou shalt be saved. For in one day he shall fight against the world with fire. And when Caesar heard that, he commanded all the prisoners to be burned with fire, but Paul to be beheaded after the law of the Romans.
Okay, so what does that have to do with Josephus?
I think so. My hypothesis, Lucius Carinus took the story of Saulus's and Gustavus's appearances before Nero to create the story of Paul being killed by Nero. I think he's conflating that guy and Josephus. So I'm not claiming that Saulus was Paul. He's not Paul. He's a different person. But this text is pretending that's Paul and saying,
yeah, but he doesn't behead Saul in the other one.
No, he doesn't. He's embellishing. He's embellishing the story and saying, because Clement, like, remember, First Clement contradicts this completely. First Clement says that envious men killed Paul. He doesn't say Romans did it. He doesn't say the Roman emperor had him beheaded. That's not how Clement portrays Paul's death. And see the scholarship on.
I'm just talking about these two texts right here. I don't really see. I don't know. I'm just trying to see what the similarities are. Didn't you say there was some sort of ship sinking metaphor or something?
Yes. Let me go back. It's at the first sentence of the first paragraph. After this calamity had befallen.
Where is that in the other one?
Oh, there isn't in the other one. I didn't say there was in the other one. I was just talking about Josephus for that. I didn't say there was in the other one. So
what is this metaphor? I don't understand. What's the point of the metaphor then?
Because I also see a similarity with 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, Paul is portrayed as going through shipwreck 3 times. And in Acts, he goes through 1 shipwreck. So I also think that not just Lucius Carinus, but even before him, there was already a literary conflation going on here with this text and the historical Paul. And I also think that this is the origin of the whole Damascus scene in 2 Corinthians 11 and in Acts. Now, that gets me back to Aretas. Okay, I didn't talk about that yet. Aretas is mentioned by Josephus. And by the way, I'm not going to read this because this is like way too long. If I go back, this is it right here. This is the passage for anybody who wants to go find it and read it later. But in this paragraph, in the Antiquities, Josephus tells us that King Aretas III gained control of Damascus in the 70s BCE, something like that, 70s, 60s BCE. I think it's 70s. This is 100 years before Paul's day. We have no evidence that King Aretas IV ever controlled Damascus. Nina Livesey also makes this point in her book, that King Aretas IV does not control Damascus. That's another scholar I cite in my paper on this, aside from Nina, is Avraham Negev. Avraham Negev, I think he was an archaeologist. He did a lot of work on Parthia and Persian history, something like that. But now he had a whole book on Nabatean history. I think that's what it was. And he says there is no evidence. I'm paraphrasing, but he's trying to tell you there's no archaeological evidence supporting that King Aretas IV controlled Damascus. And so there is no evidence to explain a Nabatean ruler of Damascus. That's what he's saying. And so this is a problem because New Testament scholars, they only believe that King Aretas IV controlled Damascus because 2 Corinthians says so. That's the only evidence they have. There is no other evidence. Scholars are aware this is a problem, and they have spent a lot of time trying to fix this. They can't fix it. Acts gets rid of Aretas, by the way. Aretas never shows up one time in Acts. Well, I wonder why. Because Luke is trying to correct a historical error in 2 Corinthians. So in Luke, what happens? Paul flees from Jews. Does that remind you of somebody? Like the guy in Josephus, Saulus? He fled when the Jewish war started. He was fleeing from Jews. Just like in Acts. So in 2 Corinthians, it's making a claim that is patently false. That Paul fled from Aretas has never happened. This did not occur. So Luke is trying to correct it and say, oh, he fled from other people. He fled from the Jews. He didn't flee from King Aretas. Now, the only way you can believe that both are correct at the same time is if you believe that Paul escaped in a basket, being lowered from a window 2 times, which is absurd. Yes, it repeats that thing, that scenario in 2 Corinthians again and Acts. That's just not, that doesn't work. You see my point?
Yeah. I mean,
so,
I kind of see what you're going. Yeah.
So yeah, you have to involve the Saulus guy and Josephus because there's already some good reasons to believe that a conflation is even happening with that guy. And so what you have is you have a Paul who dies, he gets killed in like 39.
I see what you're saying. I just don't. This Saul and Josephus is so little. He's like glossed over, so small. He's like not really like a major figure in Josephus. To the point where it makes me think, why would anyone even care about that guy? You know what I mean?
Let me give you my hypothesis. This is my best guess. Lucius Carinus, I think, was fishing for Paul to have a death differently from First Clement. He didn't like, oh, I don't like that other envious men killed him. That's not good enough. Because Christians are obsessed with martyrs under Rome. You know what I'm saying? People getting killed by Rome all the time, and they obsess over that. So Lucius Carinus wants Paul to die like that too. See my point? So I think my hypothesis, he went through Josephus to try to see if he could make something stick. He sees this guy.
Why would he say from Josephus? Here's my source. Why would he make it vague that you have to like guess?
Why did Acts rip off the Egyptian from Josephus without telling us?
Well, in that particular case, Joseph, that's more of like a mimesis, I think, that's going on there. Like he's actually that's the same thing with rewriting Paul to parallel that guy. That's mimesis. Yeah, but why wouldn't you? That doesn't. There's
ancient documents don't often admit they use somebody, even regardless of their motives.
Yeah, but if you're going to use a source that mentions a guy named Saul, why not just say it? The Egyptian says the Egyptian. It tells you who it is. We know it's the same guy. You know what I mean?
Well, the other thing is, I think one other reason why is that Lucius Carinus didn't want Paul to die to get killed in Achaia, because Saulus's last shows up alive in Achaia, regardless if he dies from Nero's hand or not. He's last seen alive and heard from in Achaia in Josephus's text. Lucius wants Paul to die in Rome and to get beheaded in Rome. He also says that Paul's head reattached to his neck. I didn't show that part. That Paul rose from the dead. So I'm like, okay, then his head got reattached to his neck. Come on, that's silly. But he actually says that he gets resurrected from the dead. So I may not know all the reasons that was going through his mind. I can't know about why he used that guy to make up the story of Paul's death under Nero.
Let's do this. What are the bullet points that they have in common? He fled. Is that it?
He fled. They were both called Saul. They were both connected to, in some sort of way, metaphorical or not, a sinking ship. Both were mentioned around the same point that there was chaos in Damascus, which was the paragraph that followed immediately after. That's it. Maybe it's not much, but it's the best I got.
Yeah,
the best I got.
Get it. That's fine.
I admit it's not much. It's the best I got.
No, I agree. I see what you're doing. That makes sense.
One last thing I'll say about it is, if there's another source for why he made up that story of Paul being beheaded by Nero, good luck finding it. That's the best.
Sure.
This Saulus and Josephus is my best guess.
Yeah.
It's something.
No, I get. You're trying to find where he got these ideas from, and it's like the meme of the guy who's at the job interview, and he's looking around the room trying to find the answer to. He's like, and like you see like a Pepsi on the wall. And he's like, I work for, my name is John Pepsi. Whatever. And like, you're catching that. You're trying to find out, where is this guy getting these ideas from? Oh, I think he found it from this. Fine.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah. That's
like
fair. All right, let's go back to John Andrew McDonald's super chat. The $5 one. It was, there it is. Some say the apocalyptic imagery of 1 Thessalonians 2:14-16 reflects the idea that Paul thought the end was underway, as per 1 Corinthians 15:20-23. Well, in a way, I kind of agree, because that's because this is happening during the Domitianic persecution. It's immediate. All hell's breaking loose. People getting killed left and right. The plan to assassinate Domitian's underway. Just read 2 Thessalonians.
By the way, somebody big must have shared this video, because we just got a huge influx in views.
Really? Do we know who it was?
I don't know, but all of a sudden there's like 1,000 people watching. There was only like 300 for the whole time.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, hello everybody. Subscribe.
Yeah. Yes. Subscribe. And if anybody wants to subscribe to my channel, it's called History Valley, by the way. So like I said, John, and thank you for the super chat again. I think that this is all about the 90s. I don't believe that anybody believed that Jesus was going to come back before 70. I don't think that was actually real. Now, the letters try to make it look that way, especially the Gospels. The Gospels try to make it look that way. But I think it was created in the 90s, just shortly after First Clement was offered, because for a few reasons. The most important reason is the plot to bring down Domitian, but also to give the church hope. It's not just the kingdom of God that First Clement was talking about. It's not just what Titus Fabius Clemens is talking about, that the kingdom is coming. It's not just the kingdom. Jesus is coming back. He's going to defeat that evil son of lawlessness. He's going to resurrect the dead. He's going to make us the only religion in the whole planet. We're going to be big and powerful. We're going to have it all. Just wait. And then after Domitian is killed, the tone totally shifts in the pastorals. Because in 1 Thessalonians, don't get married. It's coming. It's coming. It's immediate. But in the pastor's never mind. It's over now. The chaos is over. Let's have some fun. Let's get some bishops out there. Let's spread the word. Let's get it done.
I thought you said let's get some bitches. Let's get some bishops out there.
No. Okay, I can see I can see how that might sound like that fast, but that's not what
clips that. That's my, I'm just kidding.
No, that's not what I said. But the pastorals, I think they were written in 97 by Solo Gascala. And I think what's happening is, let's look at what happened in 96, 97. Emperor Nerva becomes the successor to Emperor Domitian. Nerva becomes emperor, takes over Domitian's place. And what does Nerva do? he orders the release of those whom are still alive, suffering imprisonment at the hands of Domitian. That's what happens. That actually makes sense with the prison letters. Perfectly. That makes sense with the pastoral epistles. Because if you look at 2 Timothy says, I greet Onesiphorus, whom visited me in my chain. Who visited me in my chain. I'm like, what? Who visited me in my chain? Well, this surely isn't a beheaded Paul or someone that's about to be beheaded. He's talking about his imprisonment in the past tense. He's a free man. 2 Corinthians is the same thing. 2 Corinthians actually says that Paul's imprisonment's already happened. It says in there, I suffered imprisonments. Suffered, past tense. It's already happened. That's why I think the prison letters were written before 2 Corinthians, with one exception. I think Ephesians was written between 1st and 2 Timothy, because in Ephesians, it says that Tychicus was sent to Ephesus to deliver the letter. But in 2 Timothy, he's in Ephesus. So I think that situates Ephesians between 1st and 2 Timothy. And another reason is that in Ephesians, it's not a literal imprisonment. The person that's, again, I'm talking about Saul of Giscala. Saul of Giscala, in Ephesians, pretending to be Paul, as usual, says, I suffer imprisonment for preaching Christ to the Gentiles. And the way he talks about it, it's a mental imprisonment. It's not literal. Read what he says. He never says that, by the way, in Colossians, Philippians, and Philemon. He only says that in Ephesians. So that's a mental imprisonment. I think he's saying that because he's sick of preaching the message. He's getting tired of it. He wants out. And when you read 2 Timothy, he says to everybody, my life is pouring out of me, spendomai. My life is pouring out of me. I think he's saying that his life is he's aging faster. He wants out of here. Sure. And he says, I fought the good fight. I'm done. He says that. I fought the good fight. I believe that's his last letter. He's out of here. He's done. He's had enough. And, I didn't even get a chance to mention this. Let me mention it now. In 97, one of Saul's last letters was Galatians. And in Galatians, he's super big mad. He's saying like all my work's being undone. The Galatians have forsook me. And it's like, what is he talking about? What's happening in Galatia? Like, the way he talks about it is like they were succumbing to Torah orthodoxy. And Epiphanius in his Panarion says something very strange. He claims that the Galatian fiasco was caused by the heretic Corinthus, the author of the Gospel of the Ebionites. I'm like, whoa.
He's always in the center of all this shit, that guy.
But here's the problem, Neil. I'm sure you can tell where this is going. Make that make sense with the 50s. It doesn't. Irenaeus says that John confronted Corinthus in Ephesus in 97.
That's what I'm saying, because he's not even around then. I'm looking at he's living in the end of the first century. I mean,
yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. That's a good point.
And by the way, that actually, right? You know that fits Saul of Giscala, right? You know that fits what Jerome's saying. That matches his chronology. Oh, here, pull up this PowerPoint. Wait a minute, this is the wrong one. Wrong one. Hold on. I'm trying to find the passage.
Everyone doesn't know who this is. This is one of the main heretics. One of the arch heretics of quote unquote the early church or the Gnostics, like whatever. I guess he was one of the students of Simon Magus, something like that. I think that's what they say. And then he claims he was a student of John.
Right.
Early tradition describes as a.
I got it. Pull it up.
Which probably is the more. This is probably these people didn't think they were heretics. They thought they were orthodoxy.
Go ahead and pull the super chat down. So this is from Epiphanius's Panarion. Now this man is one of the ones who caused the trouble in the apostles' time. When James wrote the letter to Antioch and said, we know that certain which went out from us have come unto you, and troubled you with words, to whom we gave no such commandment. He is also one of those who opposed St. Peter because he had gone to St. Cornelius when Cornelius had been vouchsafed in a vision of an angel and had sent for Peter. And Peter was dubious and saw the vision of the sheet and the things that were in it, and was told by the Lord to call nothing common or unclean. And so Corinthus stirred the circumcised multitudes. Notice that there, stirred the circumcised multitudes up over Peter on his return to Jerusalem by saying, just like in Galatians, he went into men uncircumcised. Corinthus did this before preaching his doctrine in Asia, where Galatia is, by the way, and falling into the deeper pit of his destruction, for because he was circumcised himself, he sought an excuse through the circumcision, if you please, for his opposition to the uncircumcised believers. But these doings took place then at the instigation of that false apostle Corinthus, another time too. He and his friends caused a discord at Jerusalem itself when Paul arrived with Titus and Corinthus and said, he hath brought in men uncircumcised with him. Speaking now of Titus, and polluted the holy place. And so Paul says, but neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised, but because of the false brethren unawares brought in, who came and privily to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ, to whom we gave place by subjection, not even temporarily, and he used to command the uncircumcised, be not circumcised. For if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. Circumcision was a temporary expedient until the greater circumcision arrived, that is, the laver of regeneration, as is plain to everyone, and is shown more clearly by the things the apostles said, especially the holy apostle Paul, for he insists, to them we gave place by subjection, not even temporarily.
Yeah. What was that?
That
I forgot why you bring that up again. What were you saying about that?
I brought that up because it's telling you that Corinthus was behind the Galatian issue, the whole circumcision problem.
Yeah.
That
Are they saying that Corinthus wanted people to circumcise?
it sounds like that.
Because that sounds like the opposite of what he would write. He would actually say.
Yeah, Corinthus is linked to the authorship of the Gospel of the Ebionites. So I actually think Corinthus
Maybe he was then.
I think he was a Jewish Christian, but he leaned more towards Torah Orthodox.
He's definitely Jewish, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's Jewish massively.
I just didn't know if he was like a zealot Mosaic law guy.
Yeah.
I didn't think he was, but I guess he is. Maybe he was.
I think Corinthus was a follower of something like the Gospel of Thomas in its original form, not the form we have it today.
Yeah.
And I have a paper on that's in the works about reconstructing the original text using manuscript evidence. Not hypothetical, manuscript evidence.
But you know what's interesting about all this is that Tiberius Julius Alexander, who I always talk about,
Right,
was procreator of Judea in that, I don't know, when was he? Let me just look it up. Maybe I could be wrong. Okay, no, it was the 40s. I thought it was later. So he was governor of Roman Egypt in the 60s. I thought he was procreator of Judea, but that was in the 40s. But anyways, he was there when the temple got destroyed. He's also he's also like in the government, like he's one of the governors, procurators, assemblymen, whatever you want to call it, of this region of the Eastern Roman Empire. And he's the nephew of Philo. We already mentioned Philo. Philo's got this whole allegory, Jewish Judaism, but allegorizing everything, like not worrying about the law as much. It's all in the heart, circumcision, not in the flesh, in the heart. That what you just mentioned, like, the idea that Christians are pushing back against like circumcision, that type of thing. This is the type of guy who would enforce that. This guy did not like the temple Jews. He quite literally destroyed them. Like he quite literally was on the scene when the temple got laid to siege. And so you would see like there are people who have high up in government that are Jewish and affiliated with the Roman government who are pushing a sort of neo-Judaism, but that's for everybody, not just for Jews. And then so you could see it in the government. That's what I'm trying to say. Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: if you
Look at this.
look at
this right here.
I'm sorry.
Look at this right here. And
No.
and recognition, this is his career till 63. So he was the procurator of Judea after Pilate is dead. and then he goes into he goes to Egypt for a while, and then it says Claudius appointed. Okay, never mind. I'm going back in time again. Claudius appointed him procurator of Judea in 46. The province had returned to direct Roman rule only after the death of Agrippa in 44. I'm just checking the source real quick. This is from Andrew Schoenfield, Sons of Israel and Caesar's Service. Interesting. And from the tenure of Alexander's predecessor, Cuspius Fadus, it had been a hotbed for zealot nationalism. Despite the opinion of some fellow Jews that he was a turncoat, his period of office as procurator in Judea was marked by peace. As Josephus himself writes, he did not condemn James and Simon, sons of an earlier rebel named Judas of Galilee, to crucifixion. It was also at this time that Judea was afflicted by a severe famine. And okay, but you see what's going on here. He's not anti-Judaism. He's just pro, let's chill out Judaism. Let's not be so fucking obsessed with all this shit type of thing. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what.
Yeah.
But that's what Christianity is. It's like it's Judaism still, but it's saying you don't have to chop our fucking flesh off, dude. That's weird. It's like we can eat shellfish. Fine, who cares? You can eat fucking, like we don't have to worry. We don't have to fucking worry about certain fabrics anymore that we can't wear. Who the hell thought of that idea? That's what you're seeing in the first century in Judaism.
Right.
Christianity.
So the thing is, when you put it all together, it makes sense that the reason why we have these conflicting chronologies in the church fathers is you have the original Paul, he dies, he gets killed in like circa 39 CE. But what you have is you have a totally different person hijacking the identity of that guy. And we're seeing clues about this in Jerome. We're seeing this in Corinth. We're seeing this in Epiphanius regarding Corinthus. And people don't appreciate this enough, and I hope eventually they will. It's like, listen, I know the church fathers can be unreliable, but let's cool our heads and think about this slowly. Why would Jerome invent a person that pretends to be Paul, hijacks the identity of that guy, and completely contradict the entire chronology of everything he says about Paul in his works? Why would he do this? It makes no sense. Why would Epiphanius claim that Paul had a conflict with Corinthus?
Yeah,
in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Sure. There's a couple more, right? You already read this one, right?
Yeah, I already did that one.
Okay. So, Jamin, thank you, Chaos Viper, for that one. Steve M for the 2. So, a theological coup of a Christian cult. Yeah? Coup, I should say, not coup. Coup. Yeah, I would say so. I would say, but it's not a one-time, it didn't happen overnight. You have a slow turning of the original cult of Christianity, a slow, progressive turning into what you find in Roman religion Christianity, like 3rd, 4th century Christianity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because by the time what you see in Nicene Christianity, the Council of Nicaea, is so far away from what you find in what we're talking about. These first couple decades leading up to the 2nd century.
Right.
Different.
That's the thing.
Different thing completely.
I have people that try so desperately, and I'm sure they will try again and again to try to find hypocrisy in what I'm saying, but about hypothetical documents. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, I have an edge over you because at least an ancient text is making the claim that they're using a source. That's not the same thing as a hypothetical text from today when we have zero attestation.
Yeah.
And that's my point. And when
Diogenes there, she just mentions Aristotle wrote this book, or Plato wrote this book, and we just don't have it. At least at least somebody's saying it existed. We're not just making it up out of thin air.
Exactly. And even if one doesn't accept the things that I'm saying about James. The evidence that the epistles are after 70, and I went over a lot of that tonight, is overwhelming for a lot of reasons.
Mhm.
That are, and not all of these arguments have to be true to see the bigger picture that Paul did not write these canonical letters. Somebody else did.
Yeah. What this one right here says, thank you, Aid Zawadi. Paul and Josephus forged in medieval scriptoriums support each other with similar events, even crossing paths and staying in the same places for many years, yet never mention each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I see the letters plagiarizing Josephus. I didn't get into that tonight, but I think there are, well, I kind of did a little bit, but there's several similarities between Paul's letters and Josephus, but that's a long story. But I'll give one example. I'll give an example. You know, in Galatians, where it talks about Paul going to Jerusalem 3 years later, even 14 years after that, he goes there again, and he took Titus with him. Well, that we actually see that story happen in Josephus, literally. Josephus in his life.
I'll do that again. Let's pull it up if you want. If you don't mind.
Go to life. Go to life. Let's start with life and go to paragraph 3. I think it's.
No, I'm talking about Paul.
Galatians 1. Go to where it talks about the 14 years. 3 years and 14 years. It's somewhere in the later part of at the end of Galatians 1.
Right here. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days.
Yeah, keep going.
I saw none of other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. Or Jacob, Jacob. I assure you,
very similar Greek words to Josephus in the James passage, by the way, but keep going.
Really?
Yeah, the Greek is very similar.
Calling him the brother of the Kurios. Curio?
Well, Yesu instead of Curio, but everything else is similar.
Oh, okay. I assure you before God that what I am writing you is no lie. Then I went to Syria and Cilicia. I was personally unknown to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. I was personally unknown. They only heard the report. The man who formerly persecuted us is now preaching this sounds fake, dude. Why would you write this in a letter? The man
Galatians is a forgery anyway, so I agree.
Yeah.
So
this is so fake.
And keep going. Let's find the 14. I think it's in Galatians 2 where the 14 years is mentioned.
It's got to be after this. 14 years.
Yeah, there it is. And then after 14 years,
this time with Barnabas, it took Titus along.
Okay, so let's think about what Josephus says. In his life, Josephus says that he spent 3 years with Banus, and then if you go to wars, 14 years later, he goes to.
Let's go to it. Where did I put? Okay, let's go to it. So we just read that. Now let's go to Josephus Wars. All right, hold on 1 second. And then which passages? Oh, I'm already logged out. That was fast.
Life 3.
Life?
Yeah, it says life.
Well, there's going to be a billion. It's going to what book is it? It's going to say that a million times.
Vita. His autobiography. Vita.
Life. Oh, it's not. Is it in book 1? Like which one is it?
It's not. It's its own book. It's life.
Oh, I see. Life of Josephus right here. Okay.
Yeah, click on that. Go to 3, life 3. Scroll down to no, just scroll down.
Oh.
Actually,
right here?
Yeah, okay. I think this is where Banus is mentioned.
What's his name?
Banus, Banus.
Doesn't mention him.
He's in there. I don't know why he's not.
How do you spell it?
I promise you. Banus. I promise you he's there.
You sure it's how he spell his name?
Yeah, Banus.
or Bano maybe Bano.
No, I promise you, it's Banus.
Different version.
At least in the translation that I read. Well,
look, it's not coming up.
that's weird. I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Hold on. You know what I can do? I can look up how do you spell his Greek name? I can do
It probably is with an Omicron, Banos, in the Greek.
Here, let me just ask, how do you spell Banis in Greek? Why is this thing frozen? All right, here we go. Banis in Greek. Banos. Yeah, you're right. Okay, all right. Let me do this.
Yeah.
No, it's not in this book. Are you sure it's probably in a different book?
Go to Life chapter 3. Go to Life chapter 3 because I could see it wasn't on that. There it is. Yeah, there it is.
Where?
It puts another N there. Banus.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why I did that. But anyway.
Well, it's got two N's in the Greek, so that's why.
Okay, good point. All right. So anyway, it's not going to change what I'm about to say. Not content, however, with the experience Fuss gained on hearing one named Banus, who dwelt in the wilderness, wearing only such clothing as trees provided, feeding on such things as grew of themselves, and using frequent
ablutions
of cold water by day and night for purity's sake. I became his devoted disciple. With him I lived for 3 years, and having accomplished my purpose, returned to the city. So, by the way, this is from the years 53 to 56.
He's like a John the Baptist figure, this Banus guy.
Yeah. The scholars have made that comparison before.
Yeah, there's a lot of though. That's not.
Now, if you go to Wars, and I don't think it's necessary to go to Wars to show this, because it's very obvious. In Wars,
I didn't realize he became a Pharisee. Look at this, and then
yes, I was getting there. He's a Pharisee, like Paul is in Philippians.
And then it says resembling, which the Greeks call the Stoic school.
Yeah,
I've been telling people this forever, that this Second Temple Judaism is like the Stoics. Anyways, what is it now?
Well, I don't think we need to go to the next one because we all know that Josephus went to Jerusalem with Titus, but I guess we can go find it anywhere. I think it's in Wars 5. I can't remember where it is. It's in my paper where I list the parallels.
Keywords I can search.
Let me look at my paper real quick and see if I can find
Titus,
where Titus and Josephus go to Jerusalem together, because that's my point. Let's see. Try Wars 654.
Right here.
Yes, so there Josephus and Titus are together at Jerusalem 14 years after his tutelage with Banus had concluded. And so my point is that there's a similarity in Galatians where you have Barnabas and Paul. Sorry, not Barnabas, Paul. You have Paul going up to Jerusalem after a 3-year period. Then he goes back there again 14 years later and takes Titus with him also. And Titus is portrayed as a Gentile, which Titus Flavius is a Gentile, obviously. So my point is that the fictitious chronology in Galatians of Paul's life is constructed off of Josephus here, because it's exactly the same. 3 years later, Jerusalem. 14 years later, Jerusalem again.
Oh wait, hold on.
Took Titus with him.
Okay, so Paul says he went to Jerusalem, and then he says after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem again.
Yes.
But then it says I took Titus along also.
Yes, and that's what Josephus does. He goes with Titus Vespasian to Jerusalem.
It's not the same Titus though.
No. It's not the same Titus. It's mimesis imitation.
Really?
It's imitation. I think it's imitating Josephus about the way he's talking about it.
why though? I just don't know why he would do that. That's where's the years that pass by? Where is that on here?
Well, the siege is happening in 70 when on Jerusalem. This isn't 70. That's my point. So that's how you get the 14 years later.
No, does it say 14 years later in here?
No, I think so this is my speculation. It's making those connecting points based on that in Galatians.
What's 14 years before 70?
56. The year that Banus the year that Banus concludes teaching Josephus. That's the year that Josephus chose to be a Pharisee.
Oh, okay.
That's my point. It's my strongest argument that there's a link between the two situations in Galatians and Josephus. Because I think Galatians is partly talking about something that's real. It's talking about the conflict between Paul and Saul of Giscala and Corinthus, pretending it's Paul and Cephas having problems with men being led by James. But then it's constructing a bunch of fictitious stuff around it, like what I'm talking about, using Josephus.
Maybe it's possible.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground tonight. That's for sure.
I think we did.
And by the way, while we're on that topic, I am, just so people don't get this the wrong way, I am not saying that Paul and Josephus are the same person like a certain idiot out there is. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. So I don't want anybody to be confused with that guy.
I guess if I'm going to be critical, I would ask you what would be the point of doing mimesis there? Because when you see mimesis in the New Testament, there's a point. There's a strong point being made, whether it's being Jesus is the superior to a god, or you're trying to convey something. In this particular case, one, the mimesis is not really clear because we're doing our own adding and trying to speculate on how many years went by. But like two, what is the point? Like, what is he doing? What is he trying to get across by saying, "Oh, our Titus is like your Titus"?
I think Paul is being turned into somebody that's like a rival philosopher, kind of like, and also a rival author for literary purposes.
Do you think Titus isn't a real person then? Do you think he's?
I actually think Titus was real, but the story that's being portrayed about him in Galatians is BS.
But if he was real, then wouldn't it be like, I don't know. Why would you? I don't know. something to think about. It's interesting.
Sure.
If he wasn't real, it would make more sense. So you're just like kind of making up a story, and you're throwing in a guy named Titus that has the same name as a guy that Paul, or a guy that
Joseph. Maybe that happened. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I think what's going on is that I think Paul, in a way, is being turned into a rival philosopher, author, kind of like somebody like Apollonius of Tyana, who lived in the same time, contemporary. Apollonius also went through the Messianic persecution from a different angle. And I also think that the imitation is because the person that wrote Galatians, Saul of Giscala, I think he liked certain elements in Josephus and wanted Paul to imitate those elements. So that way Paul is like, oh, Josephus boasts about how he's a Pharisee and has a lot of knowledge of the Hebrews. Well, so is Paul in Philippians. He's a Hebrew of Hebrews. He's a Pharisee. And the point for that mimesis is very clear. It's to make Paul a very smart man, very knowledgeable Jew. That's the point. And I think that Galatians, Philippians, and 2 Corinthians are all engaged with that. That's my best argument.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, but then it's like, why not you can just do that anyway. You don't have to like dig into Josephus and find like random cryptic passages and then like copy paste one little, like, I don't know.
Unless they're trying to one up him, but
you can just write Paul in as a philosopher. Like, there's no, I don't know. It's possible. I get what you're doing. I get what you're saying, though. I'm not saying that it's totally out there. It's interesting.
Well, when there's other good examples of the letters using Josephus, as I've pointed out earlier, it opens the door to the other things that I'm talking about. And I just want people to at least see that at least as a possibility. But I'll stop there.
Fair enough. And then that was the last super chat, right? Or no?
There's two more.
Okay, so we have this one. This is just jamming again. Thank you for that. And Eid Zawadi, 2 independent reports to give credibility to events that never happened. Both are forgeries.
Which reports are we talking about?
Is this the same super chat as before?
I don't remember. I don't think so. Without knowing which 2 independent reports you're talking about, I don't know. I don't have a point of reference.
So 2 independent reports to give credibility to events that never happened. Both are forgeries. I guess they're saying that if Paul's letters are forgeries and Josephus maybe is a forgery, then
I certainly don't buy the latter. That Josephus
or maybe that the events didn't happen, so they're forging the story itself is a forgery. It's like the story. I don't know. Is that what you meant by that? I thank you for the super chat though.
Yeah, I don't have a clue.
But yeah, I mean, this has been. I think. What else can we say? This has been. We've done a lot, right?
I don't know where else to go from here. Well, I guess I'll say one more thing before we close. Marcion. Why do I reject that Marcion's Apostolicon is older? Well, at the end of my paper, I talk about, I term the movement.
This sounds like gibberish to people who don't know what we're talking about. You got to remember that.
Yeah, I'm about to.
What you mean by that? That people.
Yes, I'll get to
that. So there's an idea, and it's just floated around by a lot of scholars. It's not a consensus, but it's out there that Marcion wrote the first. Marcion's is the original. He's the first New Testament, but the Gospel of Luke actually is attributed to Marcion. Right? That's the idea.
Yeah, what they'll say is that Marcion. So let's talk about who Marcion was. Marcion was from Asia Minor. He was from a Sinope. And what happened is
apparently, supposedly, the son of one of the 70 disciples of Jesus. So according to
I got a different theory about who his father was. Actually, I'll come back to that in a second.
According to church tradition, Orthodox and Catholic Church, Jesus, and then you have the 12 disciples, and then you had the 70 disciples that are mentioned in Luke Acts. So this is in Marcion's gospel. One of the 70 is mentioned in Paul's epistles, which is also in Marcion's New Testament. His name is Philologus. Philologus was supposedly the first bishop of Sinope, and he's the father of Marcion, according to this tradition.
I actually tried looking for that. I could never find a text that actually said that was his father. But Epiphanius does say...
It's all later. It's all church tradition.
Epiphanius says that a bishop, doesn't name who it is, expelled Marcion from Pontus.
Bishop of Sinope. Yeah. And that's Philologus.
Hold on.
Yes, it is. In all of the church lists of bishops, it's Philologus.
There's a much older text before Epiphanius called the Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John, and it says that John expelled Marcion from Pontus after he perverted his teachings.
It doesn't say John was the bishop, though.
Well, I suppose not, but what I imagine, Epiphanius and the Anti-Marcionite Prologue don't necessarily contradict each other. I see them telling the same story differently.
But he could still be the son of the bishop and be expelled by John.
Perhaps. I just think John was his dad, but that's me.
But then you had the same criticism you laid on the idea that you couldn't find a text. I could say to you, where's the text that says his dad is John?
Maybe, but
you can't get it. You can't do that. But there are actual church traditions that say Philologus was his father, and whether it's true or not is beside the point. But that's part of the doctrine of both Catholic and Orthodox.
Well, let me push back for a second. I don't think what I did was hypocrisy, because I can see why Epiphanius doesn't want to say that it was John, because if you remind people that John was the one that expelled him, then you're kind of admitting that the Gospel of John is a super late document. It had nothing to do with the testimony of the beloved disciple. And by even admitting that John and Marcion are in the same era, which is what the Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John does, you just rampage the Gospel of John. It's not real history. It's a forgery. John is lying that this has anything to do with the beloved disciple.
Yeah, but I can say right now, I think I don't know. Let me think of it. Corinthus was the son of James, right? And I go, what's the evidence? Well, why would they admit that? Of course, they're not going to tell us that. Like you can't, you can't use that as evidence because you can't say because they wouldn't tell us, therefore it's true.
Well, at the same time, my point is, I like to study the possible motivations of these texts, and
Also, why would they lie? Why would the church make up that Marcion's father is one of the 70 disciples mentioned in Acts?
Well, I would take it more seriously if I could actually see it. I just don't remember seeing a text actually saying that. I tried looking for it.
I think it's Epiphanius. It's one of the later set.
Well, if you show me where it says it, I'll stand corrected.
I could find it.
I'll stand corrected.
I could find it.
But if I remember Epiphanius correctly, Philologos was not the one named as his father. It was a bishop. So just so you understand.
But that's where it comes from.
Well,
the bishop, historical bishop.
So just so you understand my argument, is the reason I'm saying the way I'm saying it is if John expels him, it's the thing you have to understand. The bishop expels him in Epiphanius. Epiphanius does not claim that the bishop didn't expel him. That's the part you missed from what I'm saying. Epiphanius says that the bishop himself expelled Marcion.
Yes.
The Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John also says that John ordered the expulsion of Marcion. So if it's the same,
but John's not the bishop, though. So that means either John, there's two options here. Either John's the one who exposed him, or the bishop did. But it doesn't make John the bishop. It's basically saying they're both disagreeing on who actually kicked him out of the church. You know what I mean?
Well, I suppose it's possible. The way I would look at it differently is because I actually don't see how the texts contradict, and I don't think it contradicts what I was saying earlier. What I'm saying is maybe John hypothetically was ordered by the Bishop of Pontus to carry out the expulsion. Maybe that's what it is, and maybe that's.
Wouldn't John be above whoever the Bishop of Pontus is? It's John we're talking about.
Perhaps, or it's the other way around. I don't know, but it's again. I have to see the passage that makes it clear that Philologos is his father, and then go from there.
Like I said, it's not clear. Like the sources are not clear that like you can't find any early sources that say Marcion's father is Philologos. But the way it's been figured out, I guess we'll say, is that the only source we have talks about I think it says his father was a bishop. I think there's one of them that says that, but it doesn't say who. And then when you cross source that with who was the bishop at that time, it's Philologos. That's how.
Well, here's the other point that I'm making too, just so I'm clear. In the same way that I used recognitions and I used First Clement and I tied them to the politics of the 30s, and I've shown that both texts actually fit what Josephus was talking about in that time period. I'm using that same angle to analyze the Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John and Epiphanius. So it's not a contradiction to say I can use both texts equally to discuss what happened with Marcion, but the expulsion. It's not a contradiction at all. I actually see one filling the other without contradiction. That's not the same thing.
John's the bishop or he's not. If he's not the bishop, then you kind of, it's like, I don't know.
Well, I will admit this. I didn't really think about it that way before. But the Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John not mentioning him as a bishop could be a problem. I admit that.
This is what it says in Epiphanius. He was a native of Pontus, Heliopontus, in the city of Sinope, and is commonly said of him, early life he supposedly practiced celibacy, for he was a hermit and the son of a bishop of our Holy Catholic Church. So that's a very important detail. He's the son of the bishop. But in time, he unfortunately became acquainted with the virgin, cheated the virgin of her hope, and degraded both her and himself. And for seducing her was excommunicated.
By his own
father. Yeah. So then you got to go, is John the bishop of Pontus? No, he's not.
Well, there's another thing. Maybe I'm right for slightly the wrong reason. John could be his father without being the bishop.
How?
Oh wait, never mind. I misspoke. The text does actually say he was the son of a bishop.
Yes.
I must be getting tired or something.
No, that's fine. But the reason why I think that would be such a big deal if he was the son of John, that there's no way that would slip out and not be. Philologus is more understandable because he's not well known. He's not like a super important figure. He's mentioned a few times and maybe once or twice. He mentioned once in the Gospels, I think. That's it. I'm sorry, in the epistles. That's it. So,
well, I would say it's still somewhat of a big deal if it's true, because he would be the follower of the guy that forged the letters, which I would think is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Assuming it's true that is the guy that is his father, we can expand on this in a future conversation. I'm open to changing my mind on this.
Yeah.
I could change my mind on this.
And like I said, first century. Hold on, let me just look something up real quick. So, because you have Phocas, so there's another option here. It doesn't have to be Philologus. You have this guy here, holy martyr Phocas, and he's born in the city of Sinope, and he's the bishop there. I'm pretty sure he's the bishop there. Yeah, look, during his adult years, he became bishop of Sinope. And look he dies in 102. So this might be his dad right here. It could be this guy. But I think it's either him or Philologus. It's got to be one or the other. And for some reason, and I can look deeper into this and come back to the answer, for some reason, both of the Catholic and Orthodox Church have come down on Philologus as the father of Marcion. Even they'll admit that. And that's crazy. The reason why that's so crazy to me is because that's one of the 70 disciples mentioned in Acts. Philologus. You know that, right?
I'm aware, but what I would like to see, and when you can find it later, because you probably can't find it tonight, but later, if you can show me the text that actually says that from those denominations.
Yes. Sure.
Then I would like to get something written to correct the upcoming paper on that point. That is, if assuming it actually needs correction.
This is just on Wikipedia, but yeah.
I need to see the actual text where it says it's his father, then I can work with that.
Yeah, I don't know how late it is. I might even be like a 7th, 8th century source.
That's fine. I mean, I use late sources, but I need to see the text.
Yeah,
that actually says this.
But the point I'm making is it's either him, who is listed as the bishop of Sinope,
because you have to understand,
or
even if I'm wrong about the John thing, you have to at least understand the commonality between both the bishop and John, having expelled Marcion. That commonality is why I thought what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, look at this.
If that's understandable.
So he's numbered among the 70, Philologus, right? He's got his own feast day. That's how big of a deal he is. And it says it right here. According to the church, the apostle Andrew consecrated him as bishop.
I need to see her text, though.
Yeah. Of
course, this is none of this is still telling me that's his father. Until I see that, I'm going to stick with John's as dad, regardless of the problems, regardless of whatever apparent problems.
You don't have a text that says John's his dad either. Why would that be more?
Well,
more likely.
I think for now it's a slightly stronger argument until I see the text, because
John's not a bishop.
I'm reading the Panarian and the Anti-Messianic Prologue together.
Yeah, but John's not a bishop of Sinope, though. Never was. So you're just jumping.
Well, we don't know that because my point is that I'm not talking about John the Elder. John the Elder sure as hell wasn't a bishop of Sinope. He lived in the 90s. He couldn't have been. He wasn't. He had nothing to do with the authorship of the Gospel of John. I'm saying I totally just to finish explaining my point, and then I'd like to move on because again, I want to see. I need until I see the Philologus.
I'm just wondering why you need to see a text that says Philologus, but you don't want to see a text that says John was the father of him. That doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? I'm just saying.
I tried to explain, but let's just drop it.
I'm just saying one of them is officially the Bishop of Pontus, and I'm even willing to say it might not be him. It might be this Focus guy who is also Bishop of Pontus. It's got to be one of those guys, though.
I'm willing to abandon my thing. I just need to. I guess we really don't know then. Let's just go there. I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know anymore.
I mean, if either in that case,
I think we're wasting our time arguing. It's no big deal.
No, I'm just trying to figure out what the reasoning is.
Making big deal out of it or nothing. Let's get Marcion has a collection of 10 Pauline letters that have no co-authors in them. The pastorals don't mention. The pastorals are not even in Marcion's text. Hebrews isn't there. And Hebrews is not a Pauline letter. I understand. That's why I said 13 letters and not 14. And then when you look at Tertullian says that Marcion was stopped from modifying Philemon. We don't know why he was stopped from modifying Philemon, but that's what he says. If you look at canonical Philemon, there's a co-author named Timothy there. And in Marcion's version, and this is my problem with the different attempts to reconstruct Marcion's text, is so usually they'll leave the co-author Timothy out of it, and they'll say that he didn't co-write it. But Tertullian says otherwise. Tertullian says that no, Marcion's Philemon is exactly the same as what we see in the canonical text. And I don't see reconstructions of Marcion I don't see reconstructions of Marcion accounting for that. Mm-hmm. And so what I'll say is I think that the canonical text having co-authors actually explains how they look a bit better. There are contradictions between them, as Bob Price has pointed out for a long time. I'll talk about a couple. Should women be able to preach in the church or should they not? Romans says yes. 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians say no. 1 Corinthians and Romans are both co-authored. 1 Corinthians was co-written by Paul and Sosthenes. Again, I don't mean the historical Paul. I mean Saul of Giscala. And Romans is co-written by Saul of Giscala and Tertius. But 1 Timothy is not co-authored. It's written by Paul, Saul alone. And so what my argument is that 1 Timothy is helping us. We can use it to help delineate between the views of Saul of Giscala with the views of that of the co-authors. The co-authors were more accepting of women preaching in the church, leading in the church. Whereas the person pretending to be Paul did not have that view. He was against that. So that's one example. Another example is the letters don't typically push the idea that Jesus was a pre-existent being, but Philippians and Colossians both do. In Philippians, Jesus takes the form of a man in the Philippians, and in Colossians, he's the prototokos, the firstborn of creation, the firstborn. Again, both views align with the idea of Jesus being a pre-existent being, and both letters are co-written by Timothy. The author of the single author letters, Ephesians, Galatians, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, did not have that view that Jesus was a pre-existent being, but Philippians and Colossians both do. And what they both have in common is that they are both co-written by Timothy. So I think that Timothy's probably responsible for that material. Timothy probably is the guy that held the view that that Jesus was a pre-existent being. So just a couple of very brief examples of what I'm talking about. And I think co-authorship neatly explains these discrepancies. Whereas in Marcion's text, assuming that the reconstructions that have been done on them are highly accurate, I don't know, especially with them ignoring Tertullian's statement that Philemon looked no different. I'm skeptical. But anyway, if we take how some scholars reconstructed Marcion's text as a given, they are massively smaller than the canonical text. They're much smaller. They're also easier to read in a way. They don't contain these messy, contradictory views that we see in the canonical text, something that I don't think that somebody would be interested in adding at a later point. That's some brief reasons, and that's some of the reasons. There are other reasons, but I'm convinced that Marcion's text is secondary and that he did abridge the New Testament as the church fathers claimed. I'm not convinced at this time that it was the other way around. Regardless of whoever the hell his dad turns out to be, does not change what I'm saying here. That's it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was trying to find if there's what's the first time someone even says Philologus was, and it's not. It's really no one really knows. It's just an assumption based on the text that I showed of his father being a bishop. But someone even pointed out that it's probably Focus, the other guy, because of the timing.
So Neil, I want you to understand something. I was trying to think of a way to explain this to you, and I think I got it. Epiphanius, writing in the 4th century, are we to disbelieve everything he says about Corinthus and Paul's confrontation? Hold on, let me finish. Because Irenaeus doesn't bring it up, even though he brought up that Corinthus and John confronted each other at Ephesus. So I can't, if we go by the logic that I cannot coordinate my evidence for what I was saying about John, but the anti-Messianic prologue of John and Epiphanius, if I can't do that, if that's somehow contradictory to my reasoning, then I cannot use Epiphanius and Irenaeus' statements to show that the author of Paul's letters was writing in the 90s. I cannot show that Corinthus' fight with John connects to the conflict between Paul and Corinthus at the same period, because one doesn't mention the details of the other.
Right.
So that's my point. So if I can do that there, it is acceptable for me, even if I'm wrong, even if I turn out to be wrong, which maybe I am, it is acceptable for me to do the same, but the anti-Messianic prologue of John and Epiphanius. But I will rest my case on it until I see.
I'm not arguing with you.
I'm not trying to either. But earlier, the way you said it to me was like
you were trying to find where this idea came from. I didn't even bring up what you said. I just said this idea.
I thought you did.
No,
you took an issue with me identifying John as his father. Yeah, and I was trying to explain. I'm doing the same thing,
and then you said try to find where people said it was Philologus. That's what I was trying to do, and the only thing I was able to find was based on Epiphanius telling people his father was a bishop, and then he even gives details about the bishop. He says he was exemplary. He said he has extreme piety. He's one of those illustrious men who take great care of the church, exemplary in exercise of his episcopal office. Talking about Marcion's father.
Sure, and to be fair,
if that was John, he would just say John.
John has a lot of those things in common, but
yeah, but that
let's let the matter rest until.
All I'm saying is we don't know. I'm trying to let me finish. Let me finish. I wasn't even coming to attack your theory. We don't know it's Philologus at all. It doesn't even. And actually, the more I'm looking at it, the more I don't think it is, because Philologus is one of the 70 disciples, apparently, which means he was around in the 30s, and he had to have been of age, at least in his teens, right? At least. Let's try to go with the most easy, like the most likely scenario that he could have lived to 90, because Marcion's born in 85. So if Philologus is one of the 70 disciples that met Jesus in the 20s, 30s, right? That would mean he had to have been 14 or 15 to be able to live until the 85. Still,
I don't think so. So I don't think he met Jesus.
But now, what's more likely is when you look at who was the bishop at that time, it's this guy named Focus. That's probably who it is.
Maybe. We can have that. We can have that another conversation on this later. Because
it's not a big deal, man. Feels like you're all upset about it. I'm just I genuinely want to know. This is something that interests me. But look, this is just he dies in 102, and it seems like he was bishop for a while. I don't know how long he started for, but it can't be fucking. I don't think it's Philologus anymore after further review. I'm not even talking about John. I don't see anything about being John, but I'm just based on Epiphanius, it can't be Philologus because Philologus.
I agree there.
He's dead, unless the only way it could be Philologus is if this guy was only bishop for like a couple of years and Philologus was somehow alive up until. But then that still is no, that doesn't make sense either, because when was Marcion kicked out of the church? In like the 140s, right?
Yes, and well, okay. Let's think about this.
Isn't that not the truth though?
No, there were 2 expulsions. That's my point. The first one was in 135. The second one was in 144 by Bishop Pius.
Fine, let's go with the first one. The first one is in 135.
That's the one we're talking about.
Is Philologus 100 years old?
No.
I mean, and he would have been a baby when he met Jesus, even if that was the case. So it's not Philologus. That's too much. We just did that real time. I'm fine. I'm cool. I'll update my own thing on there. But now that we've established now the only question is now who was the bishop at this time? And I think it's this. It looks like it might not even be this guy, because this guy died in 102.
Well,
he's born.
Maybe you're right. I would like you to give some more thought to my suggestion, even though it might sound ridiculous to you. Give it some more thought.
I don't know what the evidence is. I don't know what to think about. You just kind of named him as that. You know what I mean? What is the evidence?
My point is, I would give some more thought to the idea, to what the Anti-Marcionite Prologue of John is saying. We can continue that conversation.
What does it say? What does it say?
What I told you, it says that John expelled Marcion.
Okay.
That's listen. The more I think about it, I kind of get what you're saying, but my evidence for what I was saying, maybe because I'm open to changing my mind too, is that, well, Epiphanius and the Anti-Marcionite Prologue,
130s.
So yeah, the implications of what I'm saying is there's a totally different man named John. This is not the same person as any John you've ever imagined. It's a totally different dude. What the
text says though.
Well, let me show you what the text says.
Let's see it. Let's see it.
Because maybe it's more helpful than it might look. I'm getting ready to show it. Just give me a second.
Okay. Because I'm genuinely curious if this is a possibility or not. So we're already ruling out that it's not the John of Revelation. It's not that guy.
Well, if he dictated the text to Papias, it might explain the difference in the language, the style, but you'll see why I say that. It says here, the Gospel of John was revealed and given to the churches by John while still in the body, just as Papias of Hierapolis, the close disciple of John, related in the Exoterics. That is, in the last 5 books. Indeed, he wrote down the Gospel while John was dictating carefully. John 21 claims it's a dictated text, by the way. But the heretic Marcion, after being condemned by him because he was writing the opposite to him, John, was expelled by John. But he, Marcion, had brought writings or letters to him from the brothers which were in Pontus.
So this is this makes no sense. And I get what you're doing here. I get what you're saying. But the reason why this is so nonsensical is because how the fuck old is John in the year 135?
So I think
the John that met Jesus, right?
This text is not claiming he met Jesus, though. Not this part of it.
The Gospel of John, right? And it says Papias, the disciple of John.
Yeah, nowhere here does it claim that he's the same John. I want
he's writing down the gospel. He's supposed to be one of these eyewitnesses. This is according to the church. He's supposed to be.
And this is why, Neil, I believe this text is telling the truth, because it's so embarrassing. By putting John and Marcion at the same time, the Gospel of John's BS.
Well, that doesn't make it true. It makes it bullshit. It makes the Gospel of John look weird, because when was it actually written, number one? And then number two, it's not the John. They're claiming this is the John that Jesus met. It can't be, unless he was 100 years old.
Well, this text is not claiming that. So all it says is that Papias was a close disciple of John. It does not say that this John was a disciple of Jesus. It doesn't say that. This text.
What is that text above that? Is that a different text you're showing up there?
That's the Anti-Marcionite prologue of Luke. It's different. In this document, it's all combined. But the Anti-Marcionite prologue of John itself, by itself, does not make that claim.
But hold on a second.
If it did, I would agree with you.
I think it is, though, because it's saying the Gospel of John. Who's supposed, according to the church, who wrote the Gospel of John? John.
Well, I would say I would say later texts have conflated the different Johns together. We know the church has done this. We have different Johns, like the author of John's letters is conflated by some church fathers with the author of John's gospel. Scholars today say it can't be the same John. I agree. It's not the same John. But this church fathers had no problems. My point is, Neil, scholars know that church fathers have no problem conflating different Johns together. And I think that's what they did. But that's just me.
Well, but hold on a second. It's identified as the disciple whom Jesus loved by the church. That's what the claim is. And that would be whoever.
That's later.
But that's a tradition that the church is claiming.
Yeah, they're claiming that later. Yeah.
What did they do this text?
This text is sporadically dated. Some put it in the 2nd century, some put it in the 3rd or 4th. There's disagreement.
And I just don't know why anyone would assume that they're talking about a different John here.
Well, I think so. I think it's a different John, because it would have to be a different John anyway. If it's a different.
And another weird thing is their story isn't the same. Epiphanius says he got kicked out for doing some shit with a virgin, like he basically SA'd somebody. And in this text, it's saying he wrote a different gospel. So these are completely different accounts. And what it actually tells me is they're coming up with all types of reasons to disprove Marcion, and they're all contradictory. It doesn't make any sense. None of this makes any sense.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the issue you're saying, so we'll have to disagree.
That is a different John, you think, of who wrote the Gospel of John?
Yeah, I just think it's a different dude named John. Just like I think a different guy named James wrote James. The Epistle of James never claims to be by James, the brother of Jesus. It's just some different dude with the name.
Well, I think that's because it got named James later. I don't think it doesn't ever say James, right?
Actually, the first verse does.
Oh, that's right, Jacob. That's right, Jacobos. Yeah,
it does say that.
Yeah. Let's just go to that real quick. Let me just see that. James, the servant of God and of the 12. Yeah, he doesn't say how the brother of Jesus. He doesn't say that. But that's another thing is so Jacob, right, or Jacobos, right? Here he calls himself a slave of Jesus. This is a different James, right?
That's my point. Different guy.
This is a different James. But that's I don't know, the idea that it's a different John. But then that's fine. This is what I'm confused about. Do you think you don't think Marcion was the son of the John that met Jesus?
No, I absolutely not. If that's what you thought I was saying, then I would totally agree with the way you were criticizing me earlier.
Yeah,
absolutely
I
not.
You were saying that. I didn't know.
No,
I guess you never.
Hell no. I would never.
He was his father, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
There we go. Now we're good.
Let me just finish on this. This is, and I'm fascinated by this topic, by the way. Maybe you're not. I am though. Panarion's account for why he was kicked out of the church is 100% contradictory to what we got in your text. They're not the same story at all.
I think you would agree with me that the Anti-Messiah prologue of John is more likely telling the truth over Epiphanius, assuming Epiphanius' account is partially, if not wholly, BS. But we'll have to analyze that.
That's what I was going to say. One of them is not real, or both of them are not real. And but the odd thing about Epiphanius is just like the weird details. Where did he get all these ideas from?
I think both of them have weird details in different ways.
They do. And it's like where one of them's lying straight up. They both can't be right. If he was the son of a bishop, which one? They don't say. They don't say it's Mark. They don't say it's Philologus.
Agreed. And that's why my best guess is maybe it's that dude called John. When you combine the text, because that's the best I can do. Because if that's wrong, then I don't know.
But as an issue with that, though, Jacob, if you're going to combine text, then you're saying that this text is credible, and then either it is or it isn't. Either he was the son of a bishop, or he's wrong.
Or how about this? I could say this: Epiphanius is completely wrong. John is not Marcion's father, but John still expels him.
That's what I'm saying. That's fair.
Okay, we could have that.
Is 100% fair because either the source is correct or it's not. And you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to cherry pick that little piece.
But in that case, I could be right for the wrong reason. Then okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
If he got expelled by a guy named John who supposedly wrote the Gospel of John, that makes a lot of sense, actually. It does.
Yeah, and that's the reason I put it in 135, because that's when Papias was writing at the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt. So if John, this other dude called John, who's lying and claiming that he's getting it from eyewitness testimony when he wasn't, is in 135, and he's dictating to Papias a few years after he wrote Revelation. That's why it's different Greek style, because John's style is Papias' excellent Greek. Then John himself wrote Revelation earlier in shittier Greek. So there.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's not the same author either.
It's not the same author because one
same theological leanings.
One didn't physically write one text and then dictated the other. So, but anyway, that we can explore that another time.
Okay. Anyways, I think we at least established that Philologus isn't his father.
Oh yeah, that's out.
So,
yeah. No. I'm glad you at least see the problem that I had there. So
yeah, no, it doesn't. It's very weird. It's based on modern conjecture of who was, It also
I could have sworn that there is no text identifying him as the father. So yeah,
no, it's not.
I didn't get that wrong.
It's just people reading Epiphanius and then going, "Well, Philologus was bishop. Maybe it's him." And then it's like, if that's the case, why not? Why can't it be Focus then? No one ever says it's Focus. He literally was alive at the same time as him.
Yeah, right.
So that's right now. That's my leading, is that it's Focus, but I don't know. Who knows? Anyways, that's it. Any last thoughts?
That's it. I don't got much more to say. I'll let everybody know my paper's out whenever the hell it comes out.
Yeah, and that's all. That's didn't you have another paper you're working on too, or no? Just that one?
Yeah, two of them, like the origin of the Old Testament. That I think that it was created by a committee in the 1st century BCE, and I was gonna the letter of Aristeas, and I'm doing work on that. And I know we talked about, we planned on doing a show at some point later when that gets done.
Let's do that.
And then my paper reconstructing Thomas, which is going to be a very small paper and a lot less complicated. So
sounds good, man.
Right. Well, thanks for having me on, Neil. It's been a blast.
Thanks for coming on. And you have just attained. Wait a minute, where's my outro? Oh, there it is. True Gnosis.
You have just attained true Gnosis. The Demiurge has no power over you.